This is us for the next few hours. John
Hey, no
Kocinski.
problem.
Welcome to the podcast, mate.
Live my life. And I tell people it's not how much you do in a day, it's at what level you do it at.
Because is there any American talent right now?
The cuisine, the food, the lifestyle, everything about it's different. There's so many more nuances you have to be prepared for to be successful there. I don't see the mechanisms in place to really get our guys ready to go over there. Why go over there if you're not gonna really have a crack at it? Really, Ducati has, or essentially you can say, all the best riders. I do know in 2027 they're gonna make some changes to the rules, which, you know, I think it's a good thing. I mean, when you see those bikes, it's almost like it's not a motorcycle anymore. You wanna surround yourself with people that do what you do that are a lot better than you.
It is important to me that supplements I take are of the highest quality, and that's why for years now I've been drinking AG1. Unlike many supplement brands, AG1 conducts relentless testing to set the standard for purity and potency. Quality for AG1 isn't just a buzzword, it's a commitment backed by expert-led scientific research, high-quality ingredients, industry-leading manufacturing, and rigorous testing. I know I can trust what's in every scoop of AG1 because it's tested for 950 contaminants and banned substances, while the industry standard typically only tests for 10. I love that every scoop of AG1 includes probiotics, prebiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support, rhodiola, and B vitamins for energy support. So if you want to replace your multivitamin and more, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs at drinkag1.com/gypsytales. Check it out.
I met a gypsy.
And then
Yeah.
the closer you sit to this, the better it will sound.
Yeah, okay.
And then you got yourself. You just lock in, mate. This is us for the next. Few hours. John
Hey, no
Kocinski.
problem.
Welcome to the podcast, mate. I appreciate it. This is a nice little, almost chance occurrence, and I'm all about it.
No, I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity, and I've watched a lot of your episodes, and I think they're really, really cool. It's not very often you see a setup to where, you know, everything today is so politically correct, and it just seems like here it's just everybody letting it all hang out, which is cool to see.
Yeah, I'm just trying to have a bit of fun. It's like the good part about not being a journalist, not being a this, not like I'm just not really anything. So I kind of just get to do what I want, and if people get pissed off, they get pissed off, and if people like it, they like it. So
No, I know that's what makes it very unique, and I think that's you know why a lot of people like to come on here and like you say, I've followed a lot of the episodes you've done in the past, and I mean they're great. I love it. I love just how people talk, and you know they're not worried about anything. They're just like you say. It just reminds me of somebody being on the track and just being wide open and just letting it all hang out.
no, well, like I said before, I wish I could actually ride good and like do that in real life, but I'll just try and do it here. So what's been going on anyway? What's life like for you at the moment?
Well, after I got out of racing, I got involved in real estate development in Beverly Hills.
Oh, nice.
But I guess the unique thing is when I stopped racing, I really got away from it
Yeah.
to a point to where I think a lot of people wonder sort of where I went to because I didn't really have any connection to the motorcycling community for quite a long time. And I finally, so it's just a matter of, I think once you've raced motorcycles or been competitive at any type of sport, that competitiveness never leaves your soul. And also too, for an athlete, I think that when you've done something your whole life and all of a sudden that ends, you sort of live the rest of your life in a state of pain because you never can find anything that will replace that. You can find distractions that will sort of, cover things up for a while, but still that sort of competitive spirit comes back to surface, and that's sort of what's happened to me. And I'm really looking forward to getting back involved in the motorcycling community, and I think I have a lot to offer. But the good thing is going into real estate, doing the development, building those large homes, and dealing with the sort of caliber of people that we dealt with, it taught me a lot about the business world, and just also how to deal with different personalities and people. So I learned a lot from it. So coming back, I feel like I'm going to be very multi-dimensional in what I can actually bring to an operation, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to help an organization really go after their dreams and actually make things happen.
Is there waves of like that competitive nature that you talk about when you retire? That can be a really good thing, like in business, but then there could also be like kind of destructive. Is there like waves you go through where it's like kind of destructive and then you figure it out and then it becomes very productive? And I don't know, like I could see that being quite challenging to navigate.
Oh, it is. And I think if you talk to any high-end athlete that stops doing what they've done their whole lives, it's really a strange place to be, and it's hard to figure it out and that's why I say you almost live in a state of pain the rest of your life, because there's nothing you can find that actually replaces it. Like I say, you can go off and do other things, and I'm going to call it more like a distraction, but it doesn't fulfill that need that basically you were born with.
Yeah, because I know like a guy like Mick Doohan, I mean, he sells planes. Like that's big business, big money, and it's like I think there's a thrill that comes from being in that world and like doing deals, and that would be similar, but I'm sure it's the same thing for a guy like him, and especially I think there's something with your generation, like that old school, like it was a wild time back then. You were wild dudes riding wild machines,
Oh,
so
no, and
I could see it being hard.
No, for sure. And when you bring up an example like McDowan, I understand that, because just like the element of the development of those homes, those homes could, be upwards of $40 million. And when you're dealing with that element of things, there is that excitement to it. But then even like for Mick, selling planes and being involved in that. But if you take that and then you say, hey, you remember the day you were sideways at 130, just laying black lines, I guarantee it'd put a smile on his face, and it would sort of reignite, what his real purpose was.
Yeah. I'm thinking like Phillip Island, just home crowd. Everyone's over the fence throwing beers and carrying on, and just what?
Oh, no, it was out of control. And I tell you, what's interesting is, really all of Europe, Australia was that way. But God, man, those countries, they get government support. It's that big, and the fans were absolutely crazy, to a point where sometimes it became, in a way, almost dangerous, because on the cool-off lap you would get 50,000 fans like standing on the racetrack, and you're trying to navigate. Everybody's trying to navigate between people to get back to the to the paddock area. But it was great times, and I was fortunate enough to have been able to sample things from 250 Grand Prix, the 500 Grand Prix two strokes, and also did some development for Yamaha when basically they went to four stroke. So I'm probably one of the few that sampled that variety.
Yeah.
But it was kind of strange, because when you look at a lot of other guys that were competitors and things, I don't know, I guess my age, I was just in a different state, and so there was never really anybody there that was around my age. Either the guys were
older or younger?
Younger.
Yeah.
And then so either the guys were 6 or 7 years older or much younger. So it wasn't like there was anybody there at that time that was actually my age. And so it was kind of unique in that way.
What was the result of that?
Well, my approach to racing was I never thought about, people say, who are your competitors? Well, look, everybody out there is a competitor, but I'm more focused on myself, and because I knew that if I got the bike set up right and did my job in the initial stages, that everything else would take care of itself. And I remember Kenny told me one time, he said, if a guy's going to beat you, he's going to beat you, and there's nothing you're going to do about it. And I still remember that today, because when you think about it, it's true.
Oh, dude, I
couldn't agree
more.
If you hang everything out as far as you can do and still stay on two wheels, and a guy, passes you and pulls away, like, what are you going to do about it? Nothing.
Yeah.
So very simple statement, but really,
Quite prolific.
yes, very much so. So I didn't, look at like, oh my God, like somebody's a big rival. I mean, definitely they were all competitors, and I raced, what I feel some of the most talented guys in the world who were, they were badasses. They're, nothing short of that, and they weren't afraid, to take it to whatever level it took to get across that finish line first. Very fortunate, like you say, but I just mainly focused on myself and knew that if I basically got my own system aligned properly, that they were going to have to deal with me in the race.
Yeah, yeah. So to go back to the retirement stuff, like how much of a plan did you have back then? Was like planning for retirement a thing?
No, I never even thought about it. It's just, when it was over, I just moved on.
Was it over quick, or did you see it coming, or how was that transition?
I never really thought about it. It just, I guess the last year that I rode was in America. It was in 2000 for Vance and Hines with the Ducati effort. And I was supposed to come back in 2001 and do a second year with Ducati, but with a group called Competition Accessories with Larry Pegram. I went to Daytona and I did the first tire test, and then the sponsorship fell through. And I just went on about my life. I didn't announce any retirement. I just went on quietly, and then no one ever really saw or heard of me for 20 years.
That's wild, eh?
Yeah, it just
And there was no like thought behind that. Were you bitter at the industry, or
no. I
just the
wasn't,
chapter closed and then
but,
turned to the next page and kept rolling?
I think what people, here's the way I look at it. An athlete's life and career is like a loaf of bread. It has a shelf life. And like when you go into a bakery, they don't leave the bread and the muffins from last month, and you have to really understand, you have to get there, get it done, because there's a shelf life to it. And when it's over, you have to know when to move on, because sometimes I see guys that sort of come back and try to keep doing it, and that's when sometimes things can go bad. And so, yeah, I think it's just a matter of knowing, and it's not so much of knowing a time, but like you say, when it was over and that sponsorship fell through, it's like, okay, I want to do something else. But, I wanted to prove to myself that I could go off and be successful at other things, rather than racing.
How old were you?
I was 31.
Okay.
Yeah, 31.
Yeah.
So it's, quite young. But
Yeah.
when you look at it in today's time, careers are extended now. Guys are racing much longer.
Yeah.
And,
like how old's Aleix?
I think he's 34.
Okay.
34, yeah. I think he's 34 years old. But, guys are racing much longer. I mean, even if you look at Kenny's career, Kenny was only over in Europe for maybe 6 years, 7 years. That was it.
Yeah.
And so the time span was much shorter in the earlier stages, and, of course, it's gotten longer and longer. And then you look at a guy like Valentino who rode for 20 years.
It's insane, eh?
Oh, no, yeah.
What do you think the difference is?
Well, I think the electronics have definitely made those bikes more friendlier. They're not as violent. Those 500s, man, they were wicked. And when you would get slammed on the ground, from high siding one of those things, it would
no airbags.
There was no airbags.
No nothing.
And it's kind of funny because I'm actually come back to do some track days, and Dane Easy just made a new suit, and I told him, I said, that I didn't want that airbag and the hump, and I said, when I crash, I want to feel it. And so I'm just not used to all this technology in these suits. It's amazing what how things have changed.
Bro, I'm the exact opposite. Give me everything. Give me all of the things. Like, blow it up before I go out.
I was going to say, you want the Michelin Man suit.
Yeah. Just give it to me before I'm out there. Just let me ride.
No, exactly. No, for sure. But yeah, it's, like I say, it was a great period of time, and we're just very fortunate. And I'm one of the few who, when I got out, I've never been injured. I'm very lucky, and all my joints, my legs, I've never had surgery on any of that stuff.
Wow.
So,
You might be the only man that's ever ridden a
Well,
500 two-stroke.
I'm telling you, like you say, Eddie and I were, and that's one thing that I always looked at him and he was the master of
Which Eddie?
Eddie Lawson.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was the master of, and he was so smart in that way that, Eddie was going to put it all on the line, but he was so good about walking that tightrope to the last millimeter of the edge, but he knew the limit. And when he was at that limit, he didn't stick his finger or his toenail over that limit, because when you do, that's when you're flirting with disaster. And he was so good about walking that tightrope, and that's why if it required, okay, today he wasn't going to win, he was going to get second or whatever, third, he would take that. But a lot of these guys, they just keep opening the throttle and opening it to the point of where everything's upside down, and some of those guys paid a heavy price for it.
Can you see if there's like a 500 two-stroke, like what are they? Wasn't MotoGP, so it's like
No, it's just the 500cc World
Yeah,
Championship.
I want to see some crashes like from back then, because they were just wild, eh?
Oh, what the thing is
And then crash video. I don't know why, but this puts a lot of perspective into just how gnarly.
But I can explain to you how violent the snap was. Example, Randy Mamola at Laguna Seca, the thing tried to high side him and he hung on to it, but it separated his wrist from his arm. And I just remember sometimes that snap was so violent that you could feel your internals just get shaken loose from your core. Just the snap of it. Then you were up over the triple clams, you're slamming your nuts on the gas tank, and it was beyond getting the wind, and that's if you saved it. And if you didn't, it was like basically getting shot out of a cannon, just body slammed, with that sort of force. There's a couple of times I know one time in one crash I remember, and it was probably one of the only times I ever high-sided, but it was in Hockenheim, and I couldn't get up. I laid there, and just my internals actually screamed. Like I heard everything inside my body scream, and I tried to get up, but I couldn't get up. It just knocked the living hell out of me, and finally I was able to get up to my feet and get off the racetrack. But it's like you say, I remember that like it was yesterday. It was violent. And that's one of the things that the guys, with all this electronics in today's, MotoGP world, is it's tamed all that down, and so that they're not so susceptible to having these just nasty, vicious high sides, and it's really hard to explain. I tell you, just one time experiencing it, and it's the sound. I can make a certain sound to somebody who's ridden one, and they say, "Oh, I know that sound." That's when you're getting ready to take a trip to the moon. And but like you said, I think I only had really one big high side in my whole career.
Really?
So, and that's why, example, like, Wayne and I, we required completely different chassis. Like I couldn't ride Wayne's bike, to the best of my ability, and then he couldn't ride mine because our riding styles were very different.
What would you set your bike up for?
Well, mine was more, Wayne had much more what I call sweeping lines, and he carried a lot of lean angle for a long period of time. And that's why carburation was very important to him.
Because he trailing the throttle a lot?
Yeah, because when he would start to crack the throttle, if it wasn't really smooth, it would upset the bike.
Yeah.
And because he was leaned over with a lot of lean angle, but for a long time. And, man, he rode the edge of that tire. He was unbelievable at doing it. But I didn't like that. I wanted to get the thing in, on the brakes, get it turned, and get it back up on the fat part of the tire to accelerate off the corner. And that's why when I crashed, I would lose the front. But the high sides were, they were.
And like his style was probably a bit more susceptible to high sides.
It was.
Yeah.
And Wayne, if you look at his career, he had more high sides where I had more front end,
Yeah.
But, the front end things were typically, you fall down, get up, and if you could start, you could get going again. But those high sides,
Yeah, it's over.
oh, no, I'm telling you, I wish I had a way to articulate it better. But when I tell you it would loosen everything, all your internals, it was that violent.
Yeah.
But just the initial snap of it, as I said, that alone, it felt like it could shake your brain loose in your cranium. And
Yeah.
it was unbelievable.
And is it because they were so rigid, the chassis, or they were too flexible? Like, because you can kind of get that from both ways, right?
The thing is, they made a lot of power in a very narrow power band, and they were light. And with the Michelins, there was a lot of grip. So
to just rubber band itself.
Yeah, no. I mean, there were times I remember telling the mechanics, like, man, if this back tire lets loose, I'm going to end up in the next country. And but it was, like you said, it was the people that rode those things in that period of time would basically tell you the same thing. Like you said, I remember Randy, it literally pulled his hand from his arm, like separated it.
Dude.
And he didn't hit the ground. He just tried to hold on to that snap. When it snaps sideways and it snaps back, that's when, he held on to it and rode it out, but it broke his arm.
What was the scariest track?
Probably Hockenheim or like Salzburg.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that it was scary. The problem is when you get, and it's probably worse in the 250 days because you could get 7 or 8 guys. And when you're in a group of people like that, when you catch the slipstream off 6 or 7 guys, you can like go past them probably 10 or 15 miles an hour faster, and you can get sucked into a corner like with such extreme speed that there's no way you're going to make it. And what's scary is when you're, inches away from 6 other guys, that was pretty nerve-wracking. And
so did Hockenheim kind of set up for that?
Hockenheim was that way, and Salzburg was that way. They're really fast racetracks, because it's, when you're riding that close to guys and you're worried about, especially if there were 3 guys and you were the 4th guy, I mean, you could literally when you're on the brakes, you could just go past these guys 20 mile an hour faster just because of the slipstream. And it was, and it can happen to you without you, it just, because it's hard to gauge everything, but suddenly it just happens. So you're not expecting it. And so I was, I was like, wow. I mean, I know I remember in Salzburg going into turn 1 on the 250s, I actually had it locked up, and I put my left foot on the ground like a dirt tracker because I thought, man, here it goes, and it was something that I never experienced before because in America we didn't have tracks that were fast like that. But I would say that when you say scary, that was probably, but other than, riding them or the speed, no, none of that was scary, but just being in groups of people at really high speeds and just dealing with the draft and how it can affect, the bikes is what was, because it was hard to tell when it was going to happen.
And so, but like the speed didn't scare you, like that shit was fun?
Yeah, no, cruising along at 200, it's like you're doing 55 down the freeway. You get used to it. But, like in the wintertime when you would be off for a month, you go back, and I just remember the first time getting back on a 500, it would, the first couple of times down the straight, you physically couldn't see because acceleration, your whole body had to sort of readapt to it. But, it's
So you think that's what happens? Your body just starts to adapt more and more to the actual speed, like your brain just starts to process things quicker?
Oh, it does. I remember, being at test or even being at race events, we'd go to a tire test, for 3 days, and, we'd test, 100 rear tires. And I remember each day you get done at the test and you get back in a car.
Oh, and just feels like you're walking.
And it's like the whole world is in slow motion. Like everything you do, it's the most strangest thing. It's like, wow, you just wish all these people in the world could experience, that, and then kind of see what the real world's like.
Yeah, because it's like almost two different realities at that point, right?
Oh, it is. It is, and it's yeah. You just have to remember, like, yeah, I'm back in regular society now, and you have to drive normal, and yeah, it's just a whole different sort of perception.
Yeah, I think that's like you guys probably all just have such a different perspective on things because you're like spending so much time of your life in a completely different version of reality in a sense. And I think, like for me, I've done 3 or 4 track days. So it's like you're kind of there, but it's almost like opening up a door and then closing it again. Like you're looking in and then you're out. But you guys, it's like you kind of get to like open up the door and like really like look around the room and see what's in there. And I think it's probably like that perspective that you're trying to explain is
Yeah, it's an adjustment. It really is an adjustment, and like you say, it's really hard to articulate. It's like you'd have to experience it to be able to know about it. But it would just be, awesome to see, some of the people in the regular world be able to feel that, and then go back to the regular world and see, like, wow, it's like everything is in slow motion.
How long did that last? Did it go away pretty quick or?
Well, if you're away from it long enough, you sort of kind of mellow down back into regular society. Just how your depth perception and that's why I always thought it was important to stay in tune with other sports. Just to keep my mind sharp. My physical conditioning. My mental state, my balance, coordination, timing. So I found other sports that I would go and do to try to stay up on all those areas because
What did you do?
skateboarding was one.
No shit.
No, I really like to skate. Tournament water skiing, and when I can ride my motorcycle, I like to ride flat track, even motocross. But I tell you, skateboarding is skating transition like at a skate park or a skating half pipe. Boy, you talk about a razor edge between, being in the hospital or really like experiencing like a super high, very thin edge. And I always say skateboarding basically is a constant state of ass busting, but it definitely will keep your skills sharp, and I enjoy it. I don't know why, and I never rode a skateboard my whole life until I was like 51.
Really?
And yeah, it's just funny when I remember being at the Cove in Santa Monica, and I'm up on the top deck, and there's all these like because basically those skate parks are full of kids that are 12 to 16 years old, and you don't see many 50-year-old people out there on a skateboard.
51-year-old millionaires.
Well, just
skateboarders.
exactly. It's like, but I liked it, and just my just having a youthful spirit, and man, I loved all the kids and being out there, and just being out there with them was cool. But I just remember one time I was up on the platform, and these young kids were going, "Hey, send it, old man, send it." And I'm thinking, yeah, right. It's just funny. But
if you only knew, little fella.
yeah, exactly. But it's a cool sport. I enjoy it. And
How tall are the ramps that you like dropping in off and shit?
I'm only 4 to 5 foot ramps.
Yeah, still.
But the whole vert thing is, it's a different animal. But again, it's like, when you ride a 250 and you ride a 500, it's that much faster. It seems like, wow, this is impossible. But it's just getting used to it and learning the techniques of it. Because you see the good guys do it, and those guys just drop in like it's nothing. And just all the tricks and things they can do, it's pretty amazing. But just attempting that, just the balance, the timing, the coordination it takes is, I think it's a sport that, if you can do it, that will definitely keep you sharp for anything. And I've noticed, even when I go and water ski, my sense of balance over the ski is so much better. And I'm able to recover from things, like perhaps there's times when you get late in the slalom course and, a lot of guys it's like it's over, but I'm able to regroup and stay in the game just because of the skating that I've done.
Yeah, especially skaters too. You can look at a skater and be like, okay, you're like just down with pain. You're completely fine with getting slammed. Because you
Oh,
just can't skate and not get slammed.
that's the thing. I
It's
mean,
fucking gnarly, dude.
oh, yeah. You know, I was actually skating at a park in Verdugo Park in over in Burbank, and I and I fell down and ripped my collarbone off my shoulder blade. I'm laying there on the concrete thinking, I've raced motorcycles my whole life, for whatever 25, 30 years and never got beat up like this. And so I had to go in for surgery to repair my right shoulder, and I had a type 3 AC joint separation. But yeah, and there's no protection. That's
No.
one thing that I've noticed. I mean, you see those little pads or the pads you wear on your elbows and your knees, but you fall on your back. I mean, it's literally like falling,
Yeah, it's just
4 or
concrete.
5 feet
Yeah.
in the air, right down straight on the concrete. And
Yeah.
that helmet is, you ever see the straps? They're all loose. I mean, but there's just no protection.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like, this is like a form of madness.
It is.
But man, when you skate or you do a trick or, just rolling up and, doing a 50-50 grind, it just, man, that feel that's all worth it.
Yeah.
It's just being able to, like you say, attempt that, try it, and just, being there and being a part of it. It's really cool.
It's just cool that you're still looking for that too. Like I like to think that I'll be the kind of guy that as I get into my 40s and 50s and 60s, like I'm still going to do the things that I really love doing now, because it's like I ride purely for myself. I just love being on the bike. I love building my bikes. I love working on my bikes. I love riding my bikes. I love jiu-jitsu. I love golf. Like I love all these things, and they're like, for me, it's like a soul-filling thing. Like I don't give a fuck about winning things. I like getting better at things. I like progressing at things. And it's just like there's a feeling of fulfillment, and like there should really be no time limit on that, I would hope. And I love meeting guys like yourself that are just constantly evolving, learning new things, and like it still feeds their soul in that same way,
Well, I think a lot of it, for me stems from, when I first went to Kenny's ranch, and, I guess I got, I look at it like a family. Eddie was Kenny was the dad, Eddie was the older brother, the middle brother was Wayne, and then there was a kind of a gap. And you see families where there's like a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, then there's like a 5-year-old. And the 5-year-old is, not tall enough or, can't play the same games with the older kids, but boy, he's trying hard. He wants to be, play with the big boys, but he's, it's just because he's so young, maybe he can't. So I always like to think I was just that scrappy kid hanging on by Eddie and Wayne's shirt tail with my fingernails, just, getting kicked around like a rubber ball, but learning from these, learning from the best. And that's why I said, man, I've gotten beat up and humbled by the best in the business. And one of the things I remember, I was at Kenny's house one day, and he had to measure me for a suit, for a leather suit, and he laughed. He went to measure my legs. He said, "Are you kidding me?" He said, "You're never going to ride a 500 with these legs." My legs were like toothpicks, and he laughed at me. And I realized, once I moved into Grand Prix, I didn't realize it as much in America, but once I went to Europe, there wasn't one of me. There were 15 of me. And everything about your program had to be elevated. And then, of course, moving to the 500s, I knew, or I learned quickly, that it was going to take more than talent to win.
Mm.
And, just watching how hard Wayne and Eddie trained and prepared for this stuff, that's one thing that I was, I guess, lacking or didn't think as much of. But coming back to your point, the things I learned then are basically how I've maintained my life and my conditioning. I still train a lot. I take very good care of myself. I'm happy to say, I've never tried any sort of drugs in my life. I've never drank, smoked. I don't do any of that activity. Never have, never will. And how you take care of yourself is going to determine what you just said, and that's having the longevity and being able to go out there at 60 years old and ride in a skate park.
Mm.
I think that it's very important. And like you say, I still train today as if I were in competition because, just the sort of the school of hard knocks that I went through it with Kenny and that whole business. I live my life, and I tell people it's not how much you do in a day, it's at what level you do it at. So I still have quite a high level of expectation in everything that I do, and I have to train and be in that sort of state of mind physically and mentally just to be able to be happy with myself and still in what I can do. So, but I think your health is basically the thing that's going to determine how long you can do it, how long you can keep doing it, and even being in the right mental state to want to. I mean, just like you said, who starts riding a skateboard in their 50s? I mean, that almost sounds crazy, but the fact that you can do it is just shows your state of mind. Like, it's like I feel like a kid that never grew up.
Yeah, it's funny, eh? Like we had a bit of a talk about there's like you can spend 12 hours working on something and think you're working hard, but if that same thing could have been done in 1 hour, like you just fucking waste it. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like it's not how hard you work for how long. It's like how hard are you working on that thing that is the right thing to do at the right time. And then are you going to take your next hour and then apply it to the next best, So there's this whole kind of facade of like, I work 12 hours a day, or I've worked this, or I'm doing that. I'm like grinding, but it's like, are you being effective? Are you being productive?
Yeah, that's right. You could be grinding on the wrong thing, and
For years.
oh yeah, no, for sure. There's sort of method to the madness, and how you go about it, and being able to be efficient, and effective at it. But like you said, I learned from the best, and I tell you, I take those same principles that I learned 30 years ago and apply them today, and I'm still turning and burning, and I'm proud of it.
So what were those principles? Like, how would you summarize the way that those guys lived their life that was so impactful on you?
I guess the biggest thing is the discipline. When you look at today's society and just sort of what these young kids coming up, sort of how they conduct their lives. And I tell you that growing up at Kenny's Ranch and going through, his training process was, I saw so many people leave there. I mean, I want to say definitely emotionally damaged.
Yeah.
I mean, they were broken, and there were very few people that could sustain that type of upbringing, I guess we can say. But I was able to reconnect with Kenny last month in Coda, and I was able to sit down and have a conversation with him, and I told him that, the things that, I told him how much I appreciated what he did for me, and that the things that I really appreciated the most is when he was the hardest on me.
Yeah.
And I think in today's society, a lot of that's missing.
Yeah.
I don't think these guys understand the commitment and really sort of how hard you have to get after it. And Kenny was a hard ass. And like you said, I saw so many broke people that would go there like in a fairly healthy state of mind and leave there just broken.
Yeah.
And I remember, just a couple of months ago having a conversation with Wayne Rainey. And when Wayne went to Europe, his first time to Europe in 1984, he did that 1 year there with Kenny with the 250 project with Alan Carter. And he came home at the end of 84, and Wayne said, Kenny broke his spirit. And so even a guy with that sort of mental strength like Wayne, Kenny broke him. And, it took Wayne a couple of years to recover, from that and sort of get back going again. But it was, yeah, if you could survive that, there's nothing in Europe. And I understand why, first of all, Kenny is the way he is. He's not he doesn't understand a lot about psychology or empathy or understand, wow, you could be, you may be hurting this person, this, and he does. It's not anything intentional. It's just the way he is. But like you said, he, when I look at what we did collectively, meaning Kenny, Eddie, Wayne, and myself, I don't think you'll ever see that kind of dominance in our lifetime in Europe again. At least not in my lifetime. But it's just a very unique situation, and like you said, it was really nice to be able to thank him for everything he had done for me, but I told him the things I treasure the most were just how hard he was on me. And like you said, it's so funny when you see other people that sort of went through it, and when you see them left, I mean, just a broken spirit.
What kind of stuff would he do? Like, what made it so hard?
Well, I just remember even like on daily things, just the things he would say to you, it was, I was always sort of dumb and stupid and couldn't ride my way out of a paper bag but the thing is I understand. And I told Kenny that I said, man, I love you like a dad. And that's the thing that I really appreciate, because if he didn't prepare me that way, I mean, I went to Europe my first year. I didn't know any of the racetracks, nothing. And we went with a motorcycle that was 18 kilometers slower than everything else there. I mean, you couldn't have basically went over there in a more dysfunctional way. And I won the championship the first year. And I mean, who does that today? But that preparation that he put me through, because he knew the sort of mental strength it would take to pull something off like that. And he was a key to my success. And that's why it was so cool to be able to thank him for that, because a lot of times people would think, you would be upset or disgruntled about it. But the thing is that I treasure the most was probably the thing he would have thought I would have treasured the least.
Yeah.
But no way.
I mean, I think the exact same thing about my dad. Like, I think back now to how hard my dad was on me and my brother, and like the expectations that was set. And, looking back now, it's like almost childish, in comparison to like what life actually serves you up and the shit that you actually have to go through. But like, we did go through a lot of hard shit that he would do. And I look back now and I'm so glad that he did all of those things and like held such a high standard, because the reality is that, if you're going for something in life, if you're going for something hard, and if you're really trying to accomplish something, like, it's gonna be difficult.
Yeah, I remember one day Kenny had this Kubota tractor, and there were these 55-gallon drums that had trash in them, and he had this huge container. So he told me to get in the bucket in the front end loader. So he raises it up, 12, 14 feet in the air, and I'm in that bucket with 2 or 3 of these 55-gallon drums of trash. So when he drove it over to because he wanted me to empty the things into the dumpster, but he's, with a hydraulic lever, he was, pushing it back and forth, trying to throw me and all the trash and the drums in that container. And I was hanging onto that bucket. I mean, just crazy stuff, and yeah, it was just how it was. And up there, when you pulled up, you didn't get greeted by, hey, how are you doing? You just got shown the middle finger. And it's like, what the hell are you doing here? Just, wow, it was pretty wild. And I remember there were some guys that had come from Europe, and Kenny would come into the garage, and he had one of his dogs' name was Buddy. He was a boxer, and Kenny told this German guy, he said, yeah, Buddy, he likes it when you scratch his nuts. And then Kenny just walks out of the garage, and this German guy was like, he's looking at me, and he said, what's wrong with that guy? And I said, nothing, man. I said, everything's perfect. And it's just the little subtle things, crazy things like that were just nonstop.
Yeah.
And, but man, I wouldn't trade any of that for the world. And I tell you, it's those are the things that have made me, successful in pretty much everything that I've wanted to do, after getting out of racing.
Yeah.
And that's why I said, I've been trained and humbled by the best. And so my mind, how I take care of myself and all that conditioning and just that mindset of it just hasn't changed.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool to hear. So what was the setup at the ranch like? How were you guys able to train for racing there? Like, did he have dirt track, flat track, that sort of stuff?
He had 2 short tracks there and a couple different style. Of course, in the area that it was in the rolling hills. So a lot of some of the motocross tracks were literally just natural terrain. It was beautiful. I mean, it was great to ride on.
Whereabouts was it?
In a city called Hickman, and it was just outside of Modesto.
That's right.
Up in Northern California.
Yep.
But when I say it was the Wild West, I mean, and I just remember, to try to sum up the whole thing, it was literally being out of control at all times. I mean, if you're, let's just say your limit was a 10. When you went there and walked in, you were at a 15. The way we rode, the trained, we're lucky that, I look back and think, wow, it's lucky someone didn't get killed. Hurt bad, because we were out of control. But you think about it, but that's the time when you need to push the envelope to expand your parameters, is it during that part of the season. So when you come back to racing, you did come back, 10% better, 5% better, because you had extended your limits of really where the limit was. And we were always riding beyond the limit through all that winter training, whether it be on the short tracks. Hell, I remember a time where I took half my spokes out on Kenny's front clutch, on his clutch lever, on the short track. It was very competitive, aggressive, and but it was just always being, that point of out of control the whole time with everything, with every element and everything. And hell, I remember one time, Bubba was up there one time, and I know Wayne was, and Kenny, and we'd gotten done, and we were going to go back to go eat some Mexican food at the next city over called Waterford. It was called Su Casita. Those guys would remember it. It was a Mexican restaurant Kenny always went to. So we left the ranch, and Kenny's in his Nissan Pathfinder, and I know Wayne and Bubba and myself were in a van. So Kenny cuts out through the trails, going through the natural, like where the tracks were. Bubba pulls out a 12-gauge shotgun, starts firing this thing off out the window, and smoke's coming out of the end of the barrel. Like the Wild West. Like stuff you would see in a real movie.
Yeah.
But that's how it was up there. Kenny had turned his car over, not that day, but another time he flipped the Pathfinder upside down on the roof. Stuff went down up there that was unbelievable. And like you said, it's just amazing no one got seriously hurt.
But it probably desensitized you guys for the racing. You probably racing is such like an anxiety and inducing experience, and it's so crazy and it's like so hectic. And it's like if you guys were making your daily life more hectic than any race day, it almost would, act as like bringing you guys a level of calm on race day.
Well, exactly. It's almost like how you describe, after testing all day on a 500, you get back in your rental car to drive back to the hotel. That's exactly right. When we went to the races,
you were chilling.
It was like you had toned it down. And that lifestyle was, like you said, it was radical. And, I'm sort of lucky because, like in everything in racing, there's always these little groups, and there's some groups that are pretty tight. And, I'm one of the only, when I say outsiders, because I was born and raised in Arkansas, and I moved to California literally the day after high school, moved to Modesto, to be at Kenny's Ranch every day. But I was really the only outsider that was taken in, and that's, I became part of that group. And, basically, as Wayne told me last month, he said, dude, you're family, so it's like the four of us, it's like a family. And when I when I met with Kenny there at Coda, I told him, I said, we're like your kids, man. And we really are.
Mm. How much older is he than you?
Kenny is like 18 years. He's a couple of generations, right at a couple of generations older. Eddie and I are exactly 10 years apart, and Wayne and I are 8 years apart.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so you were the youngest by a stretch.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I was that scrappy little 5-year-old just trying to hang on to the 12-year-old shirt tails, because I wasn't big enough or couldn't play this, but I sure tried. And I guess, how you see it's like the little one's always the pain in the ass, and that was me, just doing everything I could just to hang on because those guys were good. And like you said, I learned a lot. And but that's what made me, like when I went to Europe the first year, I wasn't intimidated by anything. And I won 7 rounds, was on the pole 8 times. I mean, basically just dominated that series. But it all came from that little Wild West town of Hickman and the way Kenny had trained us.
So what was like a week like for you guys?
Well, see, Wayne and Eddie were in lived in Southern California. So they would come up from time to time, but I was there 5 days a week. I lived in Modesto, and I was there, 5 days a week. And I spent more time with Kenny than probably anybody. So it's almost like Eddie, because Eddie was much older when he sort of went through the mental training toughness of Kenny. So he got less of it, I would say. Wayne got a little more of it, but I got the bulk of it.
Yeah, because you were the Grom.
I was the young kid. I was there at 17. I pretty much sort of finished growing up, at his house. And, but it was interesting because I think Kenny, he definitely had a plan. And we were very similar in the fact that I think where we wanted to get, and I think our talent levels were, I think he looked at me and sort of saw a lot in me of himself. And I think, because he spent a lot of time with me and helped me and worked with me, one-on-one, on the bikes and things like that. And he never spent that much time with anyone else.
Yeah. And so what would how many days were you riding? What were you doing off the bike? Like, what was the actual routine?
Yeah,
like?
no, it was, we spent a lot of time on the bikes, whether it be on the short tracks. We typically would ride, the short tracks every day, the motocross bikes, then, gym training. But there were a lot of things that, one thing in specific I can remember is, Kenny, the way that you had to pitch a short track bike into the corner and literally get the front wheel 90 degrees to the rear wheel, where the wheel actually stops rolling and it starts skipping across the ground, and basically the thing's on the cases. And I just remember, out there by myself, just time after time after time, just trying to get this down, because basically you learn how to spin the bike around with such precision and get it turned and get it off the corner, and just all those drills and things and I was the one there. It was nobody else there. It was just me. And that's why I say he spent a lot of time with really a lot of the in-depth, how to get it done sort of thing. I mean, learning really his craft. And I think truly that he spent more time with me teaching me that craft than anybody.
And so, you just be spending hours a day doing these drills?
And that's the thing that I think Kenny saw is he didn't have to motivate me.
Yeah.
He just said, man, this kid, he knew I wanted it, and I was there. And matter of fact, one day he said, man, we can't do this every day. I'd be there every day. That's what I wanted to do. And I never needed to be like, hey, we need to motivated. I was self-motivated and almost overboard.
Where do you think that come from?
I think my mom. I would say my mom. She was, I guess, that way. My dad is motivated, but not as much as I think like my mom.
And what was it about your mom that made you so motivated?
It's hard to say. I think it's just it's just failure is not an option, and you're gonna have to find a way to get it done. You got to figure something out. And I just think about being in races where you were probably in second or third, and how am I going to win this? And things are happening so fast that you got to make quick decisions, but sometimes you have to dig deep. And again, that comes back to the training at the ranch of riding every day that out of control, that it was just disaster waiting to happen. But that's what prepared me to be able to do that more consistent, but it also extended my parameters and my ability.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone else during that time, matter of fact, I know, and I look at it now, and you think even in, this many years later, we were lucky to have that place, and I was just lucky to be a part of that, because that type of environment just doesn't exist. And I think, wow, if it did, there'd be a lot of broken spirits.
Yeah. A lot of people that just couldn't handle that.
Oh, they couldn't handle it. And I tell you, I saw so many people walk out of there, and they were, probably mentally affected for the rest of their lives. It wasn't for everybody.
Yeah,
that's for sure. But it's something that I treasure a lot, and I'm just stoked that I'm able to sit here and talk about it, and it's brings back some good memories, and also memories of just thinking, man, I don't know how I made it out of there alive.
Yeah. It's definitely, I guess, like traumatic to go through as a young kid trying to make it, and I'm sure like a lot of uncertainty about, like, is this worth it? Is it going to pay off?
I never thought that way. I really didn't. I guess where it all started is I knew. I went to Daytona, and I think it was like about 82, and that's where I had first. I'm not sure if you heard of a guy named Bud Axelin, but Bud is the one that actually gave Kenny a start in racing, and he was actually from Manteca, which is just a city, 10, 15 minutes north of Modesto. But Bud was like kind of a father figure to Kenny, and that's where Kenny got his start. And oddly enough, Bud is the one that, he stayed with Kenny his whole, when I say career. When Kenny raced that Proton, all those cylinders were done by Bud. And so, Bud has been...
So he's a full OG.
Oh, no, he was, like you said, I've seen interviews where Kenny said he was like a father figure. And basically, Kenny would run out there and make a mess, and then he would call Bud to come clean it up. And so Bud was, even though he was a quiet one, not many people have heard of him, he was really the one in the back that made the magic happen.
Like the Gustamato kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, and that was one of the things even in COTA that I told Kenny. I said, Bud is the one who looked after Kenny pretty much. And even, as Kenny went through the dirt track ranks, I know other people worked with him. But if you ever see photographs, look at the outer perimeter, and you'll always see Bud. So he was the quiet one that sort of had Kenny's best interest, and he guided him. And I said, if it wasn't for Bud, Kenny and I's careers would have been radically different. We wouldn't have been near as successful. And he's another big part of it. And one of the things I told Kenny at COTA was, I said, of all the people that you had up there, I said, you never called Bud in to help anybody. And a lot of times Kenny just sits there. He doesn't say much until you hit the right nerve. And when I said that, and I said, but it was only me that you had Bud come and help. And he just immediately snapped back and said, that's right. So clearly, when I look at it, like Kenny and I are, Bud is the one who sort of was the magic behind it.
Did he used to come over to Europe and he was there a lot, or? It
started, and when I first saw Bud or heard of him, I saw him in Daytona, and he was there working on a 250.
Did he race himself?
Oh yeah. Bud was, he dirt tracked during the day, like Lodi Cyclable and things like that. He was, he could definitely ride for sure. And so when I had originally saw him in Daytona in '82, I was like 12 years old, and I was there just racing as an amateur. And I remember when I saw him, I would go out and do my practice, and then I'd come back in. I'd go over there and just stand and watch him work. And it was like it was magic, it truly was. And I just remember thinking, if I could ride those bikes and have him work on the bikes, that I thought, I could be a champion. And being such a young kid, just imagine somebody, a 12-year-old walking into HRC Supercross team and say, hey, I want to try that bike. People would look at him like he was crazy. And so I actually wanted to ask him, hey, you should let me try it. Because I guarantee I probably could have finished in the top. I know I would have, just because I knew I wanted that so bad. And but I didn't, because I thought if I said something like that, he'll probably think I'm crazy, and I don't want to, have him think that. So oddly enough, 5 years later, here I am riding for Kenny, Bud's the mechanic. And I won 3 straight U.S. titles and went to Europe and won my first world championship. So I knew that at 12.
That's wild, eh? That's such a crazy foresight on your end. You must have just been obsessed with it.
Oh, I was. But to be that young and to see that and think,
yeah, that's very, very rare.
Like, that guy is going to guide me to greatness, and he did.
What was it about him? Just had that draw.
Well,
it was magnetic.
One of the things is Bud used to make exhaust pipes. He was a very good 2-stroke tuner, and as a kid, we could never afford some of that stuff. And I just always wanted his, after meeting him, I thought, man, I got to get some of those exhausts for my TZ. I just wanted them. I wanted them like bad. And I thought, man, if I had those exhausts, I'd win everything. But I never got them. Like you said, we couldn't afford some of that stuff. And it was just an element of, it was just, I don't know. It was just like magic. I knew it was, and I knew that's, what was going to take me to, to get me to the destination where I wanted to be. And it's ironic, because in '85, I rode for an endurance team and did endurance races that year in '85, and the owner of that team actually had got a hold of a TZ from Yamaha. And it was the TZ that Wayne, because in '84, Wayne went to Europe and rode for Kenny, but he rode the first race of the year at Daytona. And so that after that race, that bike went back to Yamaha and it got sold off. Well, this guy, John Bradley, bought this bike, and that's who owned the team, an endurance team that I rode for. And he had mentioned to me that he had bought a TZ from 250 from Yamaha. And I said, well, he told me a few things about it. I said, well, why don't you bring it to the next race, endurance race? And so they did, and they took it to Pocono in Pennsylvania. And at the time, just, give you a little foresight, that thing had, Hummel cylinders, had Bud's pipes, because it was the bike that Wayne rode. And I remember when they lowered or opened the doors to the trailer, and I saw those exhausts, I knew right away. I thought, man, I got to find a way to get that bike out of this truck into my shop. And so after that race, the truck was going back to California, and they stopped off in St. Louis, Missouri, and I had flown home and drove my truck and met him on the side of the freeway and got that bike. And it was the second national. And the thing is I told John Bradley I wanted to race it. I just didn't tell him I was going to race it at a pro level. So here I am trying to pull shenanigans to try to ride it, because it had Bud's pipes, and I was only 17 at the time, and the second national I won. I beat Wayne and won it by 20 seconds. And I just remember having that thing in the back of my truck, and I'm lucky I didn't die going home, because I was looking in the rear view mirror more than where I was going, because I and the thing is, I was thinking, people didn't know what I had in the back of my truck, but I was getting ready to terrorize the world. And I knew that. And I was like 16 at that time.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah, you're obviously just a kid that just really wanted to change his life in a sense.
I guess I knew what I wanted, and no one was going to tell me it wasn't going to happen.
Do you reckon you wanted it for the right reason at that time? Or like, did you know what the reason was why you wanted it? Or you didn't even question it?
I didn't question it, didn't think about it.
Yeah.
I,
Did you
I,
ever think about it?
No, I would say no. But boy, I tell you, I just remember I had that bike at the shop and I took those exhaust off and just holding that thing in my hand. It's just like, if you knew how many years I wanted a set of Bud's pipes, and they just eluded you. They were like this mysterious thing that only certain guys had, and it was just like, what did it take to get a set of those? And I actually had them in my hand. It was almost like I'd accomplished it. It was such a huge moment where it's like winning a championship, even though I was just being able to hold that exhaust and just see it. And it's like, man, this is mine, And, but like you say, the second national I'd ever rode a 250, I'd won. And I just remember, because I was a junior in high school, 17 years old, and winning that national it was unheard of.
And yeah, like, where were you in history in terms of guys to win at that age?
Well, it was Wayne was there, Wayne Rainey. It was Cork. I'm trying to think who else. Like Rich Slachter, Donnie Green, Randy Renfro. There was a whole slew of them that were, and also too, that was when Honda had just come out with the 250, and the bikes were faster, made more power. They had the aluminum frames. Everything at that time. Honda had built the first aluminum frame for the 250 Grand Prix bikes, and so they were really much more technologically advanced. You could change the gearbox. It had where you could pull it out of the side and change all the internal ratios. I mean, they were really high-tech bikes.
Yeah.
And, of course, Wayne and all those guys were on Hondas, and, I'm on a year-old bike. But
So what was the exact model of that bike? I want to see a picture of that.
it would be called like an 85 RS 250. That's what Wayne and those guys rode. But the bike that I was on was an 84 TZ 250L.
84 TZ 250L.
L model.
Yeah, 84 TZ 250L. I want to see a picture of this thing. And
But
this was a Yamaha.
Yeah, it was a Yamaha, yes.
Oh, there you go. Those things are still pretty sick. But, I mean, in comparison, like, we'll look at dude, that thing's pretty clean.
Well, I mean, but it's just, I remember in 82 being at Daytona, and of course, Jimmy Fleece was riding the bike, and I remember watching the pro practice, and at Daytona, I call it lane 4, which is the last white stripe, before the wall. And I came up with a lane 4.5, which is the last 24 inches between the wall and whoever else was there. And I just remember that old game called Pac-Man.
Yeah.
When it would eat the pill, just how it would just start gaining on everything around. And I just remember seeing Jimmy on Bud's bike, and it's what it was like. I mean, Jimmy was the only guy that was in lane 4.5, and man, that bike was fast. Unbelievable.
What kind of speeds were you doing back then?
Those things ran 155.
Okay.
And of course, when I rode that bike at that second national, I was actually, qualified in the back, and I remember Wayne saying after, because those guys were always. It's like with any competition, whether it's Supercross, there's always that top 5 or 4 guys that are always up front, and they get used to when they know who they're with.
Yeah.
But at that national, suddenly there was an element in there that they had never seen before, and it was me.
Yeah.
And they were thinking, Wayne said he thought, man, who the hell is this? And, because I just had shown up for, a national. I wasn't even going to any of the other races. And so that's another sort of unique thing about it. But like you said, that thing, it was fast. And I remember, drafting past Wayne down that front straight. And, it was like you said, Bud's pipes and cylinders. It's cool.
Yeah, that is so sick.
No, it is. It's really, really, like you said, still today when I talk about it, the memories are like it was yesterday.
Yeah, yeah, that's so cool. So, how were you racing back then at such a young age? Like, so your family was supporting you up to that point, but I'm guessing just coming from a normal family in Arkansas, it's probably not it's not like there's a heritage of champions that are
Yeah,
just coming out of there to
well,
follow the footsteps, you know?
that exactly, and that's what complicated things even more. You know, my father owned at the time in the '70s a Triumph BSA dealership. You know,
Yeah.
my dad raced, but only as an amateur. Never went pro. You know, because he had kids, and you know that of course
Busy
always
business.
takes the business it takes priority, and so. But no, he could ride, you know, short tracks, and could ride a motorcycle. Um, so he had the dealership, and you know, I started racing when I was 5. So it's that sort of a thing, you know. My dad rode me on bikes, you know, when I was 6 months old. So just growing up around it, being involved, and of course having the support from you know my family and things like that. That's how it gets going. But you do bring up an important point, and that is there was so much talent and skill during that time, you know, especially because dirt track racing used to really be the hub where all the you know the greats were going to come from because of the skill set that it taught you. And you know, being from Arkansas, it was like, you know, if you weren't from California, Texas, Michigan, you know, all these like hubs where there was like a lot of talent, you pretty much got overlooked. And so like you said, to come out of Arkansas and be able to make it is, you know, it's like almost not, you know, it's rare that anything like that ever had happened. So I was just fortunate, you know, it wasn't easy. You know, like you said, I remember times when you know a lot of guys would get a free visor for their helmet or maybe some tear offs. You know, I couldn't even get the plastic bag that the tear offs would come in for free. You know, I had to go in the trash can if I wanted one. You know, we couldn't get any help, any support, and it was always a struggle. You know, and we were really had our backs against the wall because, like you said, these other hubs had a lot of talent. There was a big talent pool, and it was in those, you know, those big hubs, and it was kind of where the factory guys would look toward, you know, only those places, and they rarely ever looked outside of those places, and it didn't really matter how good you were, and so it made it, you know, a lot harder.
So your mum was a big source of motivation for you? Like, so if your dad was super busy doing what he was doing, it was kind of up to your mum to, like,
Yeah, I would say,
in
you
a
know,
way?
my dad, you know, he was into it and he took me to all the races and, you know, he was very supportive. You know, my mom, my mom was a type, you know, if you fell down, you're laying there hurting. She's like, get up, you know.
What was
Get,
her background? Like, where'd she come from?
she wasn't raised in a motorcycling background, although my dad's business, they worked together in the business. And so, you know, she had actually, you know what, growing up I know like in the 70s and even in the early 80s, they used to have, you'd go to these dirt track events and they would have, only at certain ones, they'd have what they call an event just for like moms, and the women would get out there and try to ride. And I remember my mom rode my bike and she won, you know, so she could ride for sure. But she was, you know, just sort of, you know, she was, like I said, if you fell down and you were hurt, you know, she was there to support you, but she's also was like, you know, you got to man up and get up, get back on the bike and keep going. You know, she was that sort of that determination.
Yeah. Was the 70s and 80s the best time in America?
Well, I probably wouldn't be the best one to answer that because I would, you know, the late 70s, I was only like 10 years old.
Yeah.
So, you know, at 10, sort of how do you really think? You know, I guess more of a mid 80s to late 80s, you know, before you'd even sort of think that way. But I just know as a kid going to, you know, the Houston Astrodome every year, you know, for the Grand National Dirt Track Championship. I mean, that was like a spectacle, huge in the fan base. It was incredible, and the amount of
what year was that? Like, what year would that have been?
I remember going there in 77, 78. We went every year.
So what was it called? Let's try. I want to see if there's any videos of that.
It's just the Houston Astrodome.
Yeah.
They had it was a double header. One night was a TT, one was a short track, and you know
What was the event called?
the Houston Astrodome, like the
Yeah.
It was the first round of the Grand National Championship.
Yeah,
but
type in Houston Astrodome Grand National Championship. I'd love to see.
I mean, but all the greats. I mean, Kenny rode there, Wayne, Eddie. I mean,
And it was just a packed house.
there used to be. Here's how it was: you would get 200 entries. Okay, then there would be time practice, and they would go through 200 guys, and only 48 would make it into the show. Now, that doesn't mean you qualified for the main. That just means you have a shot at a heat race.
Yeah.
So there was 150 guys that were loading up, going home after practice. It was competitive. It was gnarly.
Yeah.
And
Oh, there we go. Yeah, there. Look at that. That's so cool.
right there.
Wow.
I mean, we're talking some of the greatest ever to ride motorcycles, rode in the Houston Astrodome.
Wow. See if there's just type it into YouTube, the Grand National Championship. So yeah, there we go. What's that? Oh, that's 1988 inside that motocross inside the Astrodome.
Yeah,
so they did supercrosses there as well.
Oh, they did all kinds of stuff inside the Astrodome.
Wow. Yeah, but those TTs in there, that would have been something pretty special.
Oh yeah, no, it was a Friday night. I think it was Friday night the TT, and Saturday was a short track.
Oh, there we go. Maybe something. Click on that. We need to.
Yeah, that's one right there that has it. This video here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, this is it. This is the short track.
So what year would this have been?
That would have been 83, I believe.
And what CC bikes are you riding?
Those are 250cc two strokes.
Yeah. And what makes and?
They had Hondas, Yamahas, Harleys. I'm trying to Suzuki's.
Yeah.
I mean, basically all the motocross bikes they made, Kawasaki's.
Yeah.
So basically, it's a motocross bike engine, but in a short track frame.
Wow. And then that's where you've got to build all your custom pipes and there's all the custom jetting that comes from it.
Everything. Those are sort of handmade bikes that are quite special, and that's Terry Poovey leading on a factory Honda.
Wow.
Because Honda had a factory team. Actually, Jimmy Felice is actually in that race too on a Yamaha. A lot of Northern California, but there's guys from all over America.
And did they have a front brake, or there was no front brake on those?
On a short track, no front brake. On a
Yeah.
TT, they have a front brake.
Okay.
So TT is more like in today's term, like supermoto, where you actually have a jump, left turn, right turn.
Yeah, yeah. Man, that's so cool. And just 250cc motocross engines.
That's what they were.
So that'd be pretty light and flickable.
Well, there you go. They're real light, and they're fast. I mean, the bikes. I would say when you see all those pro guys, and like I say, 200 guys show up, and only 48 give you the chance to even make a heat race. And sometimes you could have the fastest heat and not make the main. It was that sort of. There were a lot of good guys.
And so, when was your first experience of this?
I think Houston. Well, at least to the best of my recollection, 70. I do remember being there in 77, 78, 79.
And so you were just going there with your family?
Yeah, each year. Yeah, be my mom, dad, my sister. We went every year to the Astrodome. It was just anybody that was around during that time. When you say Houston, it's like saying the Indy 500. It was huge because they also had a dealer show at that event. So all the dealers from all the aftermarket things, all the manufacturers, it was a huge trade show there. So it just brought people in from all over America, by the thousands. It was a big event.
When did the dirt track kind of start to fall off a little bit in the US? Because it was so huge, especially in the 70s and 80s. And you had the, obviously the On Any Sunday kind of, I guess, wave of influence that had over motorcycling.
Yeah, I would say, things started to change, mid to late 80s. I think things started to shrink in terms of the amount of entries. But I tell you, that's one thing that when you look now at like the World Championship, and I just watched the last race that was in Barcelona.
I actually haven't seen any of that yet.
Yeah, and I've always said, it's basically all Spanish and Italian.
Yeah.
I mean, and so when you think of the World Championship, you think of Germany, Italy, France, Spain, Australia, Japan, America. But it's more like a European championship because there's only two countries that basically, most of those riders, that's where they're from. And when you look at the sort of the footprint that America had over there, during that period when, where it started with Kenny and basically finished with myself, sort of the local tracks, the grassroots, like where you start, in dirt track, for a lack of a better word, we sort of let all that die off.
Yeah.
And so now instead of fishing in the Pacific Ocean for talent, we're fishing in a bathtub.
Yeah.
So our numbers have dwindled to such a point to where, because I know people say, when's the next American coming? Well, we definitely haven't given ourselves. I mean, we've kind of let really where we came from. Whether you want to say Kenny, Wayne, Eddie, myself. That starting at a local dirt track, learning the skill set, advancing up. We've let all that sort of die away, and that's why it's been sort of a slim menu for bringing people up. And also it's, I look at it and think, wow, if you could find an American that, that had the talent and sort of put him through the old school disciplined way of getting ready for that operation over there, it's definitely possible to come back and have a footprint back over there again. But, until that happens, I think it's a long shot. I don't like to say that, but, it's kind of a bummer because we, for America, we really, had a stronghold over there. But even like the Australians, I'll be honest with you, I think for the Australians and the Americans, being in that World Championship, the Grand Prix, or today it's called MotoGP, it's the hardest on us because we're far away from home. We want to go home. It's a 20-hour plane ride. We literally have to pack up and move over there. But those guys in Europe, they're 2 hours away of plane ride from all the race. So they're basically home all year. We're not. And it's much more complicated when it's that way. It's harder on you. I'm sure even yourself, you're here, you go back to Aussie, you want to have, the cuisine, just the people being around.
Well, just
your
like
culture.
my friends and my family and just, like my routine, my dog, like just all the, comforts of home. You
even getting in, I'm going to say this for you, even getting on the right side of the car to go down the road, it's you probably like, wow, this is home, just the way it feels. And, until you experience that, leaving, packing up, going over there, and especially when we were there, each country was different currency and the different
languages,
cuisine, food, the languages. I mean, you just wanted to come home and have a hamburger.
Yeah.
Or something could be like, let's go to Del Taco and have a burrito, just something. It just was like, I just felt great, to be able to do that. And so, even like if you look at Australia, they're in a similar position, I think, than us. And it's much harder to get the right opportunity to get over there for the Americans and the Australians than it is the Europeans. But also, you have to take your hat off to the Europeans. And this is kind of one thing that I look at, that Kenny, had that dirt track school over there in Barcelona. But I almost feel like, in a way, we showed all of our strengths to all the Europeans, and they just copied it and tried to find a way to, make it a little better. And, I mean, they have an operation over there. I mean, these kids start out on bikes at 3 years old. I mean, you just think of something like the Taliban. These kids are trained from a young age, and they are going through the process. And by the time they're, like you say, you look at Acosta, he's 19 years old. He's in MotoGP.
Dude,
and
freak show.
And the guy, has a shot to win. And because he's been through that sort of routine, where we've here in America, we've kind of let all that die out, and they've stepped it up. But all they've done is taken basically what
The formula.
the formula, and just, but again, the sport's so big over there, they can get government funding. They can easily get sponsorship money. And like I say, you go to Australia.
Well, Dorna's right there.
Yeah, but like in Australia, the Australians are going to have a much harder time raising money, getting that type of funding to go there. So, it's interesting, but you have to take your hat off to them, because the European guys basically watched what we did and copied it, but really set up an infrastructure there to do what basically we used to do here in America, as a young age. And like you said, it starts all from the local dirt track, grassroots sort of places.
We can't do a race like the GYPSY 500 or really anything dirt bike related without first making an online pit stop at motosport.com. On our YZ250 project build, we went hard in the paint for everything from our Pro Circuit pipe and silencer to our boys and reeds and everything in between. The same goes when we're getting ready to take on a huge challenge like World Vets last year at Glen Helen, and the GYPSY 500 is no different. To prep for this insane event, we need to kit out our 4 Stark Vargs with moose tubes, hand guards, and some super soft grips, as well as our sag tool and more. To get your bike or body ready to race or ride in 2024, Motosport.com should be your first destination. They have the biggest range, the best deals, and no one has more reliable shipping or better customer service. Motorsport makes it possible for us to make our crazy ideas come to life, and they can make it happen for you too. Head to Motosport.com to kickstart your riding season. What do you make of the current crop of MotoGP talent and just where the sport's at in general at the moment?
Well, it's interesting because you see different generations of riders, and everybody thinks that their era was the toughest and the meanest and all this, but I try to keep a pretty open mind about it, in the fact that there's no question that the bikes today, to ride those bikes at the level you have to ride them at to win, it's very difficult. But I will say, I know the electronics, that whole element to it, definitely tones down the risk level, things of that nature. I think, the guys today riding those bikes are super talented. They're super capable. Everyone trains, works at it, for the most part. But like you say, it's right now, it's like the Spanish and Italian, championship, because most of the riders there are either Spanish or Italian, and I don't think that in general. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the new company that bought out
with Liberty.
Liberty Media. Sort of what they do with it, because I'm sure that's a concern of theirs. Because when you call it the World Championship, even if you go to the Olympics, you see all the different varieties of countries that are there to compete. So having that just, pretty much just those two countries involved, I don't think it's the best image. But like I say, you can't take anything away from the Europeans, because they worked at it. They did. But I think basically they just copied what, when Kenny started that dirt track school in Barcelona, they saw that sort of we kind of gave them the blueprint, and they took it from there, and so yeah, that's why I think it's pretty much dominated by those two countries right now.
Yeah, I think the Liberty Media thing is definitely interesting. I'm excited to see where that goes. Like, I think they're definitely going to need more of a Western influence in terms of riders from, I think, like, you've got Jack, who I think he's probably got the most personality of anyone on the grid. Pedro, I think, has a great personality. But yeah, they're going to kind of, like, for Liberty Media to be able to do the things that they're known for doing, I think they're going to need some more talent and a bit more diversity, or a way to, like, maybe coax a little bit more out of, like, the current crop of races.
Yeah, I think you've absolutely. It's interesting because maybe most people think of you more of come from more of an MX background, but you've actually nailed it with precision. it's too heavily influenced by the Spanish and Italian. I mean, I think if you really wanted to, you know, say everything in a one-liner, I think that's pretty much it. They're going to have to deviate from that because we need to figure out a way how to have a draw, but basically for me as an American, and being such a competitor, I'm just worried about our country, and we got to find a way to sort of kickstart our whole base and get the grassroots part of it going again, so we can have a larger sort of body of water to fish from. Because the way it's going currently, it just limits you, and the chances of when you're fishing in such a small area of water, it just limits really what you're going to catch and be able to nurture to that sort of level.
How much do you think that Nicky's death impacted the American culture?
I wouldn't say it impacted the American culture. I think the demise of the American footprint is based on the fact that we let the grassroots. I mean, the thing is, dirt track racing is what. I mean, that requires a skill set that I think is absolutely essential to be a good road racer. Just the control and the bike moving around underneath you, and it not being so alarming. But it just imagine like a business just going out of business, locking the doors. It's like, well, nothing's ever going to come out of there because the doors are closed, and that's kind of a simplistic way of saying what we've done here in America. We just sort of went out of business, and so we're not producing any more talent. But we got to reopen the business, but the frustrating part is we've kind of given them all of our secrets, and so we're going to have to get really creative with how we're going to get this thing moving again, because just to come back with the same sort of protocol is not going to be good enough. You're going to have to find a way to improve upon that substantially.
Yeah. Do you think that there is a resurgence of the Moto America series? Like, I think there is some, building blocks starting to take place, but it's definitely a very, very long way away from MotoGP level, right?
Well, that's the thing. And then you saw where, Justin Marks, being an American owner, come in and purchase that existing team that went
He's
out.
a savage, bro.
Yeah, no, listen, him and his father have done extremely well. And, but the thing is to see him, having a sort of an American team again is really, it's really an awesome feeling. But, he just hired, David Brevio, who's the team principal. And you have to stop and think about this. He's an American. This is being labeled so-called an American team, but really there's nothing American about it. And the team principal he just hired is an Italian. So, you just ask yourself questions like, well, I wonder how long what's the shelf life for him there? Because if you load this thing up with Europeans, I think we got to be careful not to set ourselves up, to think, oh, now there's an American team. Now there's like that interim step, because it's really not an American. The only thing American is the owner, because everything else in there is nothing American about it. And I think that's initially, the guy, PJ Rashidi, who was involved, I think he was really wanting to take that team sort of back to that direction and get Americans involved. So you could, here we go. It goes back to like the Kenny Roberts team. That was all American. That was all American team. When you look at Mick Doohan's team, with Jerry Burgess, with all his mechanics, that was an Aussie team. You can't label it anything other than what that was. But we can't fool ourselves. Just because it's an American owner doesn't mean it's an American team. And it'll be interesting to kind of see how things transpire there, because I don't know, what Justin's intentions are. I'm not so sure, how much of an effort he wants to put into sort of rebuilding, the sort of American upbringing. But just by some of the things I've seen so far, I would question it. I mean, it causes me to have some concern, about really how American it is.
Mm. No, I mean, it's honestly cool to hear your take on it. Like you've been there and you've lived it, so you've definitely got a perspective that you kind of know what's going on in that sense.
Well, it's like me. There's no way I could ever know Australia better than you. You were born there. You know the country. You know everything about it. You know the culture. You know what people like. And so, with Justin having this American team, I mean, I'm not saying that David Brevio doesn't know about America, but he doesn't know it the way Americans know America. And so, we just have to watch. Maybe there's a plan there that I'm not aware of. That could sort of come back and perhaps mitigate my concern. But at the moment, I have concerns, just in seeing some of the choices being made of really, how American it truly is.
Yeah, well, I guess there's like a short-term play and a long-term play, like you've got a team that's got to make money and turn a profit and be stable, and really the way to do that in the short term is results. So I'm guessing he's caught in a mix of, like, how do I get the results I need right now to keep this thing going versus that longer play of, bringing through the Americans to where it kind of can be an American team.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's what I said without seeing that blueprint. But I'm just looking at it more from an outside thing. That when you see certain moves, it questions
I get it.
Some of this stuff doesn't that math doesn't add up. But
Yeah.
but maybe the long term plan, the math adds up. But still, initially too, it's winning races over there is. When you have budgets, about how do you spend that budget, where do you spend the budget, what are the priorities, and some of the team principals have different views on how that should be done.
Well, and they just have relationships with people. So if you hire an Italian, that's going to dictate the language that you want to be speaking in the most. That's the easiest to speak in. That it's going to dictate the contacts that you have. Like there is a follow-on effect that comes from like hiring a guy like that.
Exactly. And so we just got to keep an eye on it and kind of see what happens. I definitely want to see them do well. But it's like coming into this, and especially those guys buying the team so late and
yeah, kind of scrambling.
Well,
just make it
it's
happen.
like jumping into the Pacific Ocean with no vest on, no life vest. I mean, they're in it deep, and of course Justin is just trying to learn about all this. So you can imagine it's like drinking water through a fire hose, and so yeah, he's definitely has his work cut out there for him, but I want to see those guys do good, and if there's anything I could ever do to help that project out, I'm all for it, because I'm just all American and want to see America sort of get back on their feet and have the opportunity to get back over there to Europe and start doing sort of things that happened when we left.
Yeah, if I was Justin, I would be trying to get Jack Miller for short term, like to bridge that gap and like have that more the English speaking English rider. Like at least you're kind of getting in that lane. Like Americans love Australians. Jack he loves America. Like I think that would be a pretty sweet fit for that.
See,
initially.
But here's where
because is there any American talent right now that could just step in and do that ride? Like there's one, is he Moto 2 or Moto 3, the American?
Joe Roberts.
Is it Joe?
Yeah, Joe's in Moto 2, and there's been speculation about him going to Trackhouse next year.
Is he ready for MotoGP, you think?
We'll see. Just got to watch him this year.
He's been doing well.
He did well. I know in Barcelona. I don't know. That was kind of odd for him to get 11th place, especially when you see a guy that's either winning a race or on the podium and suddenly gets an 11th. It's like, well, where did that come from? Or I don't know if there was a bike issue or things like that. So we just got to keep an eye on him. But most importantly, I tell you, I just think these guys don't understand. Or they need help or guidance to get prepared for that. It's kind of the thing that I like to say, when you get fifth in a championship, you have to tune up your program to be able to get fourth the next year. But the biggest step you'll ever take, and I mean, it's a stratosphere apart, is going from 2 to 1. People think they'll get second in the championship and they think they're close. And I tell people, you're not close at all. That's the biggest step you'll ever take. And sometimes the transformation of a whole operation to make that step can be monumental. But it's the biggest step you'll ever take, because one guy stands at the top and everybody else is looking up. So, it's, I'm not saying people can't just go over there, but when you say being over there is one thing, having a shot at the championship is a completely different language. So, but, I just think that, we need to get our guys and really get them prepared, mentally and physically. And if that means putting them through the old school, Kenny Roberts training ranch routine, then that's what's going to happen. Because if you gotta almost be so over prepared that when you go over there, it's like you back it down a few notches. Or otherwise, I think it's a struggle. And like you said, it also too for Americans and for Australians. You got to pack up and basically move over there. It's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. It's not as easy, just from a regular life standpoint, as people might think.
Yeah, I mean, you see that with a guy like Tom Vial, like he comes over here from Europe and it takes him a couple of years and he wins, and it's like, man, it was hard. It was so much harder than I thought, adapting to a new language, adapting to a new culture. And I mean, America's a very different culture, like even for Australia. Like I come over here, I speak the language. Australia's a very Western culture, but like there's a lot of cultural differences that, and I don't know whether it's like hard to deal with, but it just kind of like makes you miss home.
Oh, no, it does. And you think, you go to England.
It's not, it's a bad place.
I know. It's like England, where they speak English, but England and America, it's radically different.
Chalk and cheese.
Yeah. No, I know the cuisine, the food, the lifestyle, everything about it's different, Yeah, so basically you just explained it. So there's so much more
nuance.
That you have to be, there's so many more nuances you have to be prepared for to be successful there. And I don't see the mechanisms in place to really get our guys ready to go over there. And I always tell people, if why go over there if you're not going to make,
really have a crack.
Really have a crack at it. And even now, in the current configuration that it's all in, I mean, it's just something for the listeners and even for you to think about. Up until recently, it was owned by the Spanish, run by the Spanish.
Do you know how much they sold it for?
I thought I heard something $4 billion. Could be something in that range. But, you never know.
So they bought it off Dorna. And Dorna's just like is it like a family business or?
Well, I know that they've retained, Carmelo and the staff sort of to keep running. It's almost like a Justin Marks thing. Justin acquired the team and he just kept all the same staff because he knew they already knew the process and procedures and he's. I
wonder, do you know how much Dorna still owns?
I don't.
Very interesting.
Well, and two, when you say, do I know? Well, knowing and assuming because of what you heard or read is, can be different. So, but back to my point is here we are Americans and, you'll hear them say, oh yeah, we want Americans and we want Australians and we want this and that. But when suddenly if that were to show up and start beating those guys, they won't want it so much anymore. And from a political side of it, as I said, those guys like Repsol, that's a government. These are huge backers that have, and you think about our politics here in America, what goes on and the influencers and how some of these guys, where the money's at and who can influence who. And it's sort of that way over there. Because you're not going to roll over there and get in, oh yeah, this is a you get the grade A stuff. I don't believe it.
You hear things about tires on top of containers, and this guy gets tires that are more to the bottom of the container because the top of the container's already got hot a few times on the boat.
Listen, I've had situations where they roll. I remember at Daytona, it was Eddie, and it was Mike Baldwin, Jimmy Felice, and I was there, but I only rode the amateur part because I wasn't old enough. But we all used Michelin, right? And we all had the same tires when they would, fit the tires. But when the tires came over, it had Lawson. They were marked specifically where those went. And I mean, why do you think that is? I don't think that's by coincidence, but
No.
I just know, and I think to myself, my gosh, it's gotten, if the deck is stacked that way, it's almost like we got to find a way to get our government involved. And it's like, if we don't get the stuff, we'll cut off the funding to your country. We got to have some power here, like some real power. I remember in the early, and actually it was in 1990, Yamaha, for the 250 Grand Prix, they were only going to make 4 factory bikes. And they made those factory bikes, and they had the 4 riders, and a Spanish guy named Alberto Puig, who runs the Repsol, who's the team manager for the Repsol Honda team currently. His father had some influence with the King of Spain because he manufactured boats and things of that nature. And Yamaha said, nope, there's no more factory bikes. But when the King of Spain got a hold of Yamaha, suddenly another 5th factory bike showed up. So that's what I mean by the political clout and power. But hopefully this transition to Liberty Media, it could change that.
Yeah.
Potentially, because like you said, those guys, you can't underestimate them. And like you say, even though they want all these different cultures back over there and they want everybody to compete, I'm sure they don't want us over there just mopping the floor.
We want you to do well.
But just not as good as us.
Not too well.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's multidimensional, and I mean, there's a lot of elements to it that you have to think about. But just back to the basics, here in America, we have to have a bigger pond, or basically a bigger pool of water to fish from. And even when we find the right fish, we have to be able to condition and train them in such a manner that they can go over there and withstand all the activities that are going to be thrown at them, because it's and being away from home. I mean, it's a hard life.
How long did you live over there? Did you base yourself over there, or like how did you split your time?
I tried it so many different ways. I remember one year in '92, I flew home after every race.
Fuck.
Oh man, and just those 3. You'd only be home for 3 days, but it was like heaven to come back. It was like literally like a dead cell phone looking for a charger. It felt like it was wonderful. But man, being on that flight to and fro, yeah, it was. There was
You went business or first class?
Yeah,
though?
I was in business, and but I tell people, when you fly economy, and it feels like economy, then you move to business, and it feels like you're in the king's chair. Then business feels like economy. Then first starts feeling like economy. You've probably, it's time to do something else. But yeah, there's no good way. Really, for an American, there's no good way. And I'm going to say for the Australians, the same thing. There's no good way to do it. I mean, you literally have to go over there and spend a lot of time away from home.
Yep. Yeah, that's what Jack does.
Exactly. But I heard, back to your point, you're saying about Trackhouse hiring Jack Miller. I've seen where perhaps he may go to Repsol, because, again, in the Trackhouse team, Brevio has worked with Joan Mir at Suzuki when he won the World Championship. So you could see where there potentially could be that draw that Brevio would want to bring Mir, because I heard Mir is going to leave Honda, and you could see Mir coming to Trackhouse because that relationship is already there with Brevio.
And that makes you think that Jack would go to Repsol?
I think that Jack's going to end up at Repsol Honda, with Marini.
Yep.
Because Marini, I saw where he wanted to get out of that contract, but I think he's going to have to stay. I don't think there's any other spots open for him.
And so then you think Pedro goes to KTM?
That's going to be interesting because, even though there's the gas and the KTM. They could actually switch seats like right now.
Yeah.
They have that sort of power in the contract. But I'm sure, and of course, gas being owned by KTM, but yet it's its own brand. It's kind of like when Cagiva owned Ducati and Husqvarna.
Yeah.
I'm sure Red Bull KTM. I mean, if it were a Honda going to win or a gas, they want to see the gas win. But I would almost bet that it's not a good day if gas wins and Red Bull KTM gets second or finishes behind the gas team. I mean, I think that's the way it's always been. So it'll be interesting to see where they move him, because they have the other two guys, and I'm not sure, because I know they've signed Bender, so he's locked in, and it'll be interesting to see what happens on the other side.
Yeah, because like theoretically, they could just swap Jack and Pedro quite easily.
See, they could, but if Jack goes to Honda, I think Pedro will go in with Bender.
And then Paul Espargo would just come back into the gas.
See, that's where I don't know who, but maybe, like you said, that's where, a different tier of, I would say, rider could potentially fill that seat. And that's one of those things where somebody's nationality could be the deciding factor in that, or maybe if somebody can bring money to the team. See, you get into that sort of political side of things. It's kind of different than when I grew up. I mean, even during my time over there in Europe, I mean, talent was what people wanted. It didn't matter if you were from America, a German team would hire you. I mean, it was like, if you had the ability, you can go anywhere.
Yeah.
But now it's not that way. I mean, where you're from can play a big part in if you get the seat or not.
Yeah. Where do you think, how do you see the Ducati landscape playing out?
I think for the sort of to basically get all the benefits out of the social media side of it, they keep playing up the Marc Marquez thing. I'm not saying he's not a potential candidate or they haven't looked at him, but
I can't see him going there.
I don't see that. And here's, I think why I would lean toward the way of I don't see that is I think that Jorge Martin right now definitely is, if he maintains the rhythm, he looks like he's going to be the one you have to take the championship away from. And I think if he ends up winning the championship, I don't see how they could overlook him for anybody else. But if he falters and doesn't win it, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. It's hard to say.
What would you do?
Well, you have to look at it that, Mark is in his early 30s now. And, all these other guys are so much younger. So if you're looking toward the future, you got to go for the younger guys. And but the fact that Jorge Martin's been on a Ducati, for a while now, I think it would be, I think I'd want to keep him in the fold, especially with his skill set and the way he's doing. I mean, how could you let him go somewhere else? Because I'm sure there's a fear that if he went somewhere else, he could be a real threat, to their brand. So the fact he knows the bike, has experience with the bike, especially if he wins, I don't see how they could pass on him. I don't. But you know what? I've seen some crazy things happen in that world. So, I wouldn't sign my life to, that happening. Because again, there could be some crazy politics of it that actually are the deciding factor. And it has nothing to do with skill or how many champions. I mean, I know guys that won championships and get fired. How does that happen? But it does.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty wild predicament that even you've just got one manufacturer that's just so dominant. Like even just to have such a crazy lack of parity within the class to where they're all like basically just like the winners are fighting over this one thing.
Yeah, it's true. But the thing is they have really, Ducati has, for essentially, you can say, all the best riders. And so they're able to really draw a lot of data from a lot of different sources, but a lot of sources that are winning races or right there to win races. So it's not like you're taking, second or third tier guys that are finishing 10th, and because maybe their information about the bike could be different than a guy that's going a second quicker. So, their draw of information to develop the bike to make it better. I do know in 2027 they're going to make some changes to the rules, which I think it's a good thing. I mean, when you see those bikes, and even at COTA, I was there, and there's so much on. I mean, it's almost like it's not a motorcycle anymore. It's almost in a way like half motorcycle, half car, and the wings and the setting things. I mean, guys are messing with the aero packages and these ride height devices, and there's so many buttons and levers on them. I thought, wow, I'm gonna have to go to university to get a college degree just to learn how to work all these controls. It's crazy. I mean, for me, I look at it, it's maybe, like you say, you get used to it. It's just the new way of how things roll. It is what it is. It's not crazy. But, when you stand there and look at it, I'd be afraid if I got on it, that thing would be like a bucking bull, because you'd be turning all these buttons. The bike would be going up and down. It would be all over the place. But, that they haven't figured out how to do it. But some of that stuff is going to go away for 2027, which I think it'll be a good thing.
Yeah, man. That's such a crazy, amazing motorcycle when it's working. But you get that GPS one turn off and the bike's completely unrideable. Like, it's wild how dialed they have that to, even just the engine braking and the power delivery and everything is just corner by corner by corner based on the GPS.
Yeah, but
it's just insane.
But when you watch it, when I watch it on TV, when you watch a guy come out of the corner, the trajectory of the line that the bike takes, everybody does it the same. Everybody opens the throttle the same. And then when you hear things like, because the aero packages on these bikes, like when you get in the guy's slipstream, the air is so bad, that it overheats the front tire. It's like, what? That doesn't even make sense. So to be able to, it's not like before where you could outbrake the guy because you actually got in deeper. And I think now to be able to pass, you pretty much you got to make contact with people because everybody's doing everything the same. So if this is the limit where you can brake and both guys brake there, well, how's the guy going to get underneath him? Either somebody has to massively make a mistake and run wide and you get underneath them, or you're going to have to, there's going to be some paint missing. Absolutely.
And some of the passes this year have just been insane.
But then they have this committee that imposes these penalties on guys. Well, that was too aggressive of a pass, or this, that. This is where it really gets, this is where the math stops adding up for me. Either you got to take all that stuff off and let these guys race, but, I remember going, you go out, you go over the curb or whatever it was. That's what it was. But now if you go too far on the curb, you can get penalized. And then how they apply these penalties is another thing that's it's interesting. And just like I was watching on a podcast from Paula on Saturday, I was there, and the Hayden Deegan thing where he went off the track, but Tom Viel gets penalized for something, and then this guy doesn't. And then here we go with this whole political thing of how are they going to address that? But more than ever, I think it sort of it can put a bad taste in the viewers. Think about the viewers, because the viewers are going, maybe they're fans of one guy and they're thinking, what the hell? You just penalize this guy and you're letting this guy get away with it. And then they think that there's favoritism going on.
Well, then you just sit there feeling like your sport's fucking shit.
Well, like there's somebody controlling the outcome of it. And that's where in MotoGP, I think that...
well, it's just like no one knows what's going on. Like not even the people at the top.
Well,
and you just feel like you're like, what's going on here?
Well, the thing is, you think you watch the outcome happen, and then some guy could turn a couple of guys in for exceeding track limits or something along those lines, and suddenly what you thought is not. But when you see some of the stuff, how it's happening, then guys are having to get a little aggressive on things because of the way that the bikes are designed. Well, look, if you design a package like A, this is what it's going to happen. Well, you need to change that. And that's why I think, getting rid of a lot of the aero stuff and sort of making the bikes become more like motorcycles again, I think will help in that aspect. But I think a lot a lot of it too with all this sort of Monday morning quarterbacking with, exceeding track limits, and some of this stuff I think it's gone overboard.
Yeah. And do you think the new motor regulations will play into anyone's favor in particular?
I don't think so. In the end, the factories, they're testing all that stuff now, and the cream always rises to the top. I mean, whoever has the bigger budgets, the better engineers they're gonna figure it out, and they're gonna rise to the top. And the ones that have less talent, less ability, less money, they're gonna be, struggling a little more. But it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But it's just nice when racing is racing, and when you watch the event, you go home and the results don't change, and it's not like political stuff ends up wreaking havoc on what you just witnessed with your own eyes.
Mm. What do you make of Pedro Acosta?
I mean, again, is an extraordinary talent. It's just going to be important for him to be in the right hands of the right people that really have his best interests at heart, to make sure to keep him from perhaps stepping in potholes that he doesn't need to, keeping him on the right track, focused. And I think, there's a real ability there to, and it's I wish he was American, but he's not. But he definitely seems like, he's 19 years old. I mean, how can he not be the future?
It's just incredible what he's been able to do. Like when you watch a career highlights of his, and you just see like he did this in Moto2, he did this in Moto3, now he's doing this in MotoGP. Like it's just phenomenal.
Well, and here's what's and I actually met him for the first time in Coda this year in April. Yeah. And when he was a kid, he actually used my replica helmet. And not only that, but and I'd like to give a big shout out to Steve Blackburn, who is Pedro's mechanic. He was my mechanic when I was 250 world champion.
Wow.
So, there was kind of a close connection there, and it was cool to see him and talk to him. And Steve says, man, he's just like you when you came over. He's not intimidated by anybody, anything. He doesn't care how long you've been there, doesn't care how many world championships you have. He's going to give you a run for your money. And it's good to see, that sort of spirit about him, and just, being able to just say what he thinks, and if it means ruffling a few feathers, he doesn't care. He wants to win.
What's the next step for him to be a guy that can win races?
It's going to be the team support and the right personnel around him. And people, I think, overlook, a team is like, I always refer it to grandmother's apple pie. She doesn't use mixing cups. She knows, she just does it by hand. And when she packages that thing and she bakes it, it comes out. No, you can't buy it. Everybody else can try it. She can give you the recipe book, and you can have people make it, but it never tastes like that. And that's a team. And that's, the importance of all of the mechanics, even the guy that cleans the wheels, the guy that drives a truck. All these people are so critical in that whole effort. And that's what I say about having somebody there that can look after his best interests and package all this in such a way with the right support. So when he needs it, or if something's not working right, the factories will be there to make the changes that he needs. And not just, well, this is what so-and-so has, so this is what it is. And I've seen it that way. And that happens with, when you get second, third tier riders, you don't get that level. You just basically take what somebody else has, and that's it.
But do you think the KTM's good enough for him to win on?
I know that they spend a lot of money. I know they want to win very badly. Every other series that they've been involved in, They have won, and that's one area that's eluded them. But I definitely think they can. But again, there's this old saying that, money can't buy taste. And it doesn't matter how much you spend per year. It's how you package it. And sometimes you can spend less and get more. So you got to have the right personnel there. And here's a perfect example. Honda was so dominant in MotoGP, and Then they went into this huge lull, and it's just before Casey Stoner went there and won the championship. But the year I was World Superbike champion with HRC, there was a gentleman named Mr. Nakamoto, and he was there to oversee the project from Japan. And, Nakamoto was that sort of guy at Honda that had castor oil in his veins. This guy was he didn't come from the scooter department, some production department, from the piano department, from the grocery store. This guy was born and bred to race. And that's why Honda went through this horrible time period where they just got, it was just a disaster for them. Nakamoto comes in and turns that whole thing around, and that was the year. I know Stoner won with Honda when Nakamoto was there. Then Honda suddenly was back dominant again. And when he left, everything's down the drain. And people talk about HRC now, and I've seen it too many times to where, they bring in these new engineers, young engineers, and like I say, you can go to, an example, but you could go to Harvard Law and get the highest degree in the world. But the only thing that means is you have a degree. That doesn't mean how good you are. And a lot of these guys come in and they're smart, but they don't have the skill set to do their job, at least not at a level that needs to be done. And I just think there's a lot of people there that are the wrong people. And that's why Honda is in this sort of unfortunate situation. It's amazing. I rode for them, and I know how they think, and I can't believe that they're going along at this level for so long. And you look around, and everyone still keeps their job. Like how's that? Strange. Because just repeating the same, nightmare over and over again and expecting a different result is truly the definition of insanity. And I don't know what their plan is, but they're lost.
Man, the last few years of Marquez and some of the crashes that guy had, I mean, there's like a few things to think about. One is just how savage Marquez is to get back on that horse. And two is just like, how could they not improve? Like,
well,
how could they not get better?
You absolutely hit on a very critical point. And this is, Marc Marquez is an extraordinary talent, does amazing things. But I look at that situation a lot different than most. First of all, if I was involved in that team, if my rider's crashing 6 times a year, I'm heavily concerned because every time your rider hits the ground, there's a risk of not getting up. Marquez was crashing 25, 30 times a year. And for that whole operation, sitting there watching this guy destroy his life, I'm thinking this is the ultimate tragedy. And everyone else is talking about, this guy walks is like just a miracle with shoes on. And I said, no, he's not. He's a human being. And I was concerned about all that. And I actually have to question perhaps his ability. He's an extraordinary talent and can ride anything, beyond his capability. But the question would be what are his development skills? Because I know if I fall down, I want to know why and figure it out. But to keep crashing like that and to go on year after year, it leads me to believe that he doesn't know really what's wrong or what's causing that. Because if it's not that, then clearly he couldn't articulate it to his engineers. But trust me, I'd be articulating it to the engineers with a size 12 boot. If I was hitting the ground that much, and I knew it was a matter of time. It's a matter of time. You can't keep rolling the dice like that. I just thought that was even though he won all those championships, to me it was a tragedy. Because it was watching a guy literally destroy his life. And I knew one of these days he was going to hit the ground and he wasn't going to get back up. And sure enough, when he did his arm in, it set him back. And who's to say, if he's truly fully recovered from that and how much that could be hindering him today.
Well, even the impact just to his brain. You know, like he's had his fucking retina detach like
Well-
multiple times.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So when you say, this guy's a savage, well, I mean, anybody can just hurt themselves. I mean, that's not clever. And that's, when I think about a guy like Eddie was smart because he knew, like Mark should have, some of those times, he should have just backed that thing down, and took second or took third. But no, he's gonna give it everything it has, and he ends up, a lot of times on the ground. But like you said, you can't crash that much. You cannot. It's impossible. It's gonna catch up with you, and it did.
Yeah, I just wonder if, like, to even be in the picture, to even be in the ballpark, he just had to push that bike to such a crazy razor's edge, especially with like how dialed in the Ducatis were. And, so it's like you've got this guy with this incredible talent that just has an ability of, like, he's a very special athlete. And then he's got these other guys that are great on bikes as well.
Well, see, but the issue didn't start when everything went down the drain. The issue started when he was winning world championships because he's crashing too much. And that's where they kept coming back with the same tool. I mean, that to me that's insanity. I mean, somebody should be fired. I mean, you can't, or you got to take care of the rider. We already have a shelf life to begin with. But it's just like, I'm telling you, if you hit the ground that many times, it's inevitable. And he was able to get away with some of it, for quite a long period of time, which, I always say, I know he has a massive skill set, but, you got to touch wood because when you're off of that thing, you just don't know when the severity of perhaps, the toll it's going to take on you. But I'm just astonished that people involved in that team could stand there and watch that. And they're all like clapping, he won, but he crashed 6 times that weekend. Yeah, I would leave there. I would be back at that factory. I would be pounding the door down because we're not going to the next race with this same tool. This guy's going to kill himself. Like, well, we got to figure this out. Well, was he not trying to figure it out? Or was it everybody else just sort of not at that level yet that he could get away with it? But the bottom line is you can't have somebody going down that much, that many times. Oh, I mean, I'd seen him sometimes you crash 6, 7 times in a weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, that's insanity in my opinion. It's insanity. And that's just looking for, for something, bad to happen.
Oh, and I remember like the Mandalika one was just like when he was coming around that right-hand sweeper and the thing just let go and spat him. Oh, I was watching that session live and I just went, fuck, like how many hits can this guy take?
Yeah.
Like, and yeah, on the one hand, you got to respect the guy's drive, but like on the other hand, fuck.
Yeah, the other hand, you have to ask yourself what the hell's going
Like,
on
this
over
isn't
there.
okay,
Well,
yeah.
who's looking after this guy? But to stand there and, I'm going to put it on all of them. I mean, Mark, all of his staff, the engineers, I mean, they're all there and they're all watching this happen. I mean, who's the one that's saying, hey, enough of this?
Mark eventually.
Well, I know, but in the wrong way.
Yeah.
And see, in the end, it ended, yeah, people talk about his championships, but now that whole thing's sort of been severed.
Oh, yeah. It's tainted a little bit.
Yeah, it's tainted, and his career didn't end the way, he
That he
thought.
should have.
Yeah, he should have been a Honda rider and retired and that. But like you said, I just thought it was a tragedy for all those people to stand there and watch all this unfold like this. I know if I would have been there, it would have never happened. I mean, I would have been like, we got to figure this out. And if I'd had to get on the bike to ride it to help him sort it out, I would have. That sort of a thing. Because I wasn't going to, I'm not going to let my rider kill himself if he doesn't know what's wrong with the bike. We have to figure this out. And, like I said, eventually it caught up with him.
What do you make of just the crashes in general? I mean, like, it's not just Mark. And I mean, Mark was, like, he was having big crashes and a lot of them. But, you watch the races nowadays and you think about, like, Casey's era and Valentino's era. Like, guys just weren't crashing in the same way. It's like, it's almost like, do these guys want to win the championship? Like, do they want to win these things? Like, what are they doing?
Yeah, but like you said, what's interesting about MotoGP today is just when I saw those bikes in Coda and you see all the mechanisms and the buttons and the ride height devices and all this activity going on, it at least it kind of, I left there with like, now I understand why everybody's sort of taking the same lines, braking in the same point. But, you know, things that are really mind-boggling is you don't really see slipstreaming much, you know, because you can't stay behind the guy because the air is really bad and it overheats the front tire. And so it's not the traditional get on a long straight, get the good drive and slipstream, or at least get up beside the guy where you could outbrake him. And it just doesn't work. It's more like Formula One.
Yeah, and it's the same problem that Formula One has.
So yeah, a lot of, like you say, different. It's just guys are crashing different because they're basically riding bikes like you'd drive a car.
Yeah. But like, so what do you think it is? Like, is the level just super high and they're just on such a fine line? Is there like a level of unpredictability with the bikes, or is it a level of it's so hard to pass now that you have to just take massive risk?
Well, first of all, I would definitely say it's hard to pass, but to be able to articulate. And I was even asking the guys there, you know, before you come in and you're like, you know, you're dealing with perhaps maybe some geometry things, you know, head angle, trail, you know, springs with a suspension, dampening. But, you know, these guys come in now and it's about aero package. You know, aero package, you know, I mean, it's just amazing how that affects the bike and what they're doing. It's just a whole, you would have to be brought up in that to even understand how those changes affect the bike. And they're, like you said, you leave it thinking, wow, it's a motorcycle, but it's not really like a motorcycle anymore. And I think that's it's changed a lot of sort of different things about it. But that's why I'm hoping that the 27 rule package will sort of bring it back to, you know, to where guys can at least, you know, slipstream down the straightaway and actually be able to get up beside somebody and be able to pass them on the brakes without having to take them out or bang into them or get into all this, you know, penalties from the panel that assesses them, you know, for, you know, too aggressive, not, you know, that's what's crazy is nobody's on the bike but the riders, and to say this move is aggressive, this, that, well, you know, it's kind of like Monday morning quarterbacking, really. Yeah. I mean, and just because something appears a certain way, if you were on the bike in that position, maybe you'd say, oh, well, it doesn't look the way it looks on TV. Yeah. And so that's what, it's really a tough thing. And it's just nice to cut all that away and just let the guys go out there and race, and whoever wins, wins, and whoever gets second, you know, is second.
Yeah. What's the most exciting form of racing for you at the moment? What do you enjoy the most?
I like all the forms. You know, I really like American flat track. Yeah. I like to watch the Supercross. Actually, Paula this weekend was my first ever pro outdoor national.
Really? What did you think?
No, it was cool. It was cool, and yeah, I really like to thank MX Sports for everything they did to accommodate for me to be there. I'm very grateful for that, and I know a lot of the people there. You know, a lot of the teams and a lot of the personnel and things. But no, I like it. I enjoy it, and the thing is, I like about, you know, because I'm really into fitness, and those guys are too, and so I feel like there's a common thread there, and just in the way they prepare and train, and I really admire that about them, and you know, I like that part, and so I really like the Supercross, motocross element, but also the road racing. I really like all the disciplines. I try to follow everything.
Yeah. The speed when you see those guys live at Parla is pretty incredible, right? Like just how hard they're hitting shit, and just like how fast those guys are actually riding. And like I think Jet, Hunter, and Sexton, and then I think like Hayden, Levi, and Tom Vial were just like clear standouts over the weekend.
Well, that's what I said. You know, the cream always rises to the top, and you know, but the crazy thing is about I think the Supercross world, where it transitions into outdoor motocross, you know, fairly quickly, because the Supercross season just ended and the outdoors just started. You know, as I said before, you know, skateboarding is just a constant state of ass busting, where motocross is just about managing injury. it's like when you watch the NFL guys, by the time they do all their regular season, they get through the playoffs, those guys are beat up. And it's just a matter of which team is the less beat up, for the Super Bowl that it typically is going to win. So I think it's important for a motocross effort to have an infrastructure set up that is really highly focused on managing potential injury, and if injuries happen, being able to help that situation recover in a much faster state, which I'm actually involved now with Jason Thibault from Superhuman Protocol, and this is something that we can bring to the table and actually help these guys, not only in the performance of their fitness level, but also in their recovery and also when they get injured. But that just seems to be the key. Is it's not that you just named off those top guys that did exceptionally well, but maybe there's some other guys that are nursing some injuries. Just like Tomac wasn't there because was hurt. So I just kind of, what state are these guys at? Because you could go to the starting line and this guy's at 80%, and this guy's at 40%, and this guy's at 95%. So, that's going to determine a lot in that because it's a hard sport.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, I think even Levi's still got sore ribs from a crash that happened in Nashville.
See, that's what I'm saying. And even you think they don't get hurt in racing, but they get, they strain their knee in testing, or they bang this or bang it. And it's always these nagging little things that can go wrong. And the problem is when you go to the starting line or go to the gate, if you're hurting, you're thinking about it. And you may not think you're thinking about it, but your body is. And that's taken away from what I call that forward momentum. And each time you start subtracting away, it gives these other guys an advantage. And so it's trying to find a way to minimize that. And so when your guy goes to the line, he's confident and he's thinking strictly about what he should be thinking about.
And so, what is the Superhuman Protocol? Like, I know we spoke about it a little bit on the phone, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it is, and I think it's something that's going to change the sport a lot. But like I say, I'm just happy to be joining forces with Jason and Superhuman. But the short version of it is it's a way to get more oxygen to the red blood cells, but it's also the red light process is a way to keep the body in a state of recovery. So if you do get injured, all the mechanisms are in place for it to basically get to that injury and attack it, so you can heal, up to 50% faster. And that's the point. Is I know most of those guys, I guarantee every one of them has got some kind of little nagging pain, whether it's a knee, an ankle, they're always banging something because, the impact they're taking, and all it takes is to get, the thing spins a little too much off the corner and the guy, misses it by 3 or 4 feet and cases it or hits it with the back wheel. I know what it, not at their level even, and I know what it feels like sometimes when you land. It feels like it loosens all your teeth, and so you could imagine that there's what those guys take, their bodies, and especially when they make mistakes, it can be devastating, as you've seen some of those crashes. But I think having the right infrastructure in place there, you can make a hell of a difference. So as much money as you spend on the bikes, on the dynoing, on the engine package, getting the chassis right, the suspension right, I feel I can come to the table and provide that same thing, for the rider, talking about increasing his performance, allowing him to get to the starting line without all those nagging little, and sometimes, it's like I say, it's a penny here, a nickel here, a dime here, and it doesn't seem like much, but when you add all that up together, it can impact your performance and just your psyche. So just, my job is to manage the riders and basically run the dyno program for the riders and just keep them in a state that they need to be in. And it'd be awesome to get the opportunity to come into this, the motocross world and try to help some of these guys, because I know we could definitely absolutely supercharge somebody's program.
So what exactly is the protocol?
The first Well, the process of it is first thing is the PEMF mat, which is a mat that you lay on, and I'm going to keep this in general terms, just so that it's easy to understand because you come at it from a scientific angle and the terminology gets so out there that you kind of lose sort of really what it's doing. But the mat, essentially, you lay on it for probably 15, 20 minutes, and it essentially turns, your red blood cells can be positive or negative, and if they're in a positive state, they're less apt to want to take on the oxygen. So the mat essentially turns the red blood cells to a negative state, and once you get up from the mat, you're on a it can be any type of machine, whether it's a rowing machine or
And then you
elliptical
have the
machine.
oxygen, right?
Then the oxygen's forced in at probably 90%.
Yep.
Whereas in standard breathing, it's around 20% is about the max you can take in. So once your cells are prepped for it, then you take the oxygen in, and after that process, you lay in the red light bed. And once you get up out of the and you're on the running machine, I would say for probably 20 minutes. And then you lay in the red light bed for approximately 20 minutes. And once you get up from there, you can, and I've done this. I went, because you know how it is. Everybody, there's a lot of different things out there, and some and it too. Everybody's DNA is different. Everybody's body makeup is different. So things will work different. Maybe work for you, doesn't work for me. But when I first went and tried it, I actually got off that red light bed, put my shoes back on, and went to the gym and ran 10 miles. And I was shocked that I hit marks that I could never hit. I mean, it's like, wow, this works. This is not a gimmick. And so, and also too, I work with Hammer Nutrition. And they're a great supplement operation. And as a matter of fact, I get product from them, but I like to use it, and then I go and run uphill. And, it's kind of like with the engines, you change the cylinder head porting, change the valves, you change the cam timing, cam profiles, and you put it back on the dyno and you run it. Because you want to see, does it get better or not get better? So I'm not into all the fluff and the nuances. It's just simple. Does it work or does it not? So it's cool to be a part of this and to be associated with it. And also, I've actually tried it. So what I'm saying about it, I have physically been through it and I know it. I'm not reading this from some brochure or from a third party. I've experienced it, and it's amazing. And I think it's a game changer.
Yeah, and then is the final part of the Superhuman Protocol the ice bath? Do you do that?
No, well, you can add that on. Some guys like sauna, ice bath, but a lot of these athletes, have the cold plunge. There's different variances of those tubs, but basically it's just freezing cold water that you get in, and it feels like jumping in the Arctic Ocean or something for 2 or 3 minutes. But it definitely, all these nuances, together, it makes a difference. But more than anything, and I still, when you look at Supercross and motocross, I as much as it is, you think about nothing breaking on the bike, nothing, not getting tangled up with guys and going down in the first turn. It's about managing the injury, because I don't think anybody escapes the season without being hurt or banged up or feeling something. I don't believe it. And if you can minimize that, I think you can add an element of, it's like somebody walking up and sort of kind of giving the team 3 or 4 horsepower. And, people spend millions of dollars for a horsepower on engine development. It's crazy. So it's just like you say, a way to sort of supercharge the whole thing. And like you said, it doesn't matter what you have. If the rider's hurt, it's only going to go so far.
Yeah. What's a week look like for you training-wise, physically?
Well, I'm typically, 2 days on, 1 day off, but, 1 day is a run day for me, and I have a program that I run on a treadmill, but I'll put 9 miles in, but it's all uphill. I have it elevated, and I keep it at a certain speed. And that's the thing, is when you can run that far uphill for that time period at that speed, that's what has helped me tremendously in everything that I've done. And of course, the second day is when I go and do all the ab work and arms, free squats, bench press, those elements to it. And I tell you, it's this year when I came back and I actually did a track day, Dainese actually made a new suit, and my body is actually the same size it was when I was 23 years old, and nothing has changed. And I'm 139 pounds, the 29-inch waist, and and I just turned 56. So they couldn't believe it. But as I said, it's all that things that I learned from getting kicked around like a rubber ball with Kenny, Wayne, and Eddie that has taught me this. And also too, I remember Kenny, when he was growing up, especially in the 70s, drugs were a big thing. Guys were drinking. I mean, hell, half the time some guys would be probably racing drunk. And I remember Kenny said that Dick Mann and Mert Lawwell pulled him aside and said, "Hey, listen, kid, if you want to make it, you got to stay away from all that stuff." And I know Kenny was a big advocate about never being involved in that. And I remember, it was just something profound that I remember him telling me. And that's what, if you look during that time, a lot of those guys kind of got into, doing some drugs, smoking dope, drinking, and things like that. And Kenny was more, he's going to train his ass off and come out there and just kill everybody. And he did.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a wild time there, man. A lot of cocaine.
It was
a lot of hot girls.
It was blow and go, man. Yeah. It was everything was happening, but Kenny was, and that's sort of what he instilled in us, and that's part of. I remember Eddie telling me a story that, he was in '83. He was in Europe, and he's sitting there after a test session. He was eating a donut, and Kenny walked over and slapped that donut out of his hand and literally said, "What's wrong with you, dumbass? Do you want to win?" And Eddie was. He was, like, wow.
Because that's extreme.
Oh, it is extreme. But that's Kenny.
Yeah.
I remember, and it's ironic because the same thing, we were in Brazil in '89 getting ready for the '90 season, testing for Michelin. And it was hot. And so I'd come in, and there was water, but so I saw a Pepsi. So I pulled the Pepsi out and popped the top and was having some Pepsi, and Kenny came over. And he's like, "Hey, you dumbass, what's wrong with you? Like, what the hell's wrong with you? If I could slap the hell out of your parents and do you not want to win? You can't be drinking that stuff." And so it just kind of reminds me of that donut story with Eddie, and that was Kenny's way of the sort of the mental toughness side of things. But he was extreme. But like you said, I can't thank him for all those times, because it made me, that's why I'm sitting here today. And that's why I had the career I had. It's a big part of why I had the career I had, why I still take care of myself the way I do. And I'm stoked, I mean, it's just cool to go out there and be able to sort of do what those guys can do, at my age, and they're half my age.
Yeah. And like, what did slow down for you? Like, as you've gotten older, like, what are the things that have gotten harder? Or have you just really been able to keep charging?
Yeah, no, nothing has changed.
That's cool. That's
my
very
time,
rare.
Listen, I can't say who, but I can say that we've had guys go through a couple of them, some high-level athletes go through the Superhuman, and my numbers were right in there with their numbers. And they're, like I say, half my age. And these guys compete today at a high level, and I don't, but I'm just driven that way. And I'm like a kid who never grew up.
Mm.
And my mind thinks the same, and I'm just, I when I go after something, it's all or nothing. And that's why I know it at the stage in my life where I'm at, I know I could really, help an organization. And just, anytime you can keep people from stepping in holes and making mistakes that you made, and especially a lot of these young kids coming up, I see a lot of these kids that have the ability and the talent, but unfortunately they're surrounded by people who care more about their interest than the kids themselves. And And I look at it like, it's a bummer, to see that. And being a rider, I just think, that guy is the one that has to get it done, and you have to take care of the rider, and you have to look after his interest. And like you said, when we talk about the Honda thing, I'd never let my rider crash that much in a year and stand there and think everything is great, or allow it to keep going like that. I wouldn't do it, because I care about the riders too much and the personnel and the people. I mean, that just would be unacceptable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I mean, as you get like kind of like deeper and deeper in the industry, you'll know like, oh, this guy manages 5 or 6 riders, and this guy manages 5 riders, and that guy, and then it's like, all right, well, each one of those 5 riders are now a pawn in this manager's chess game, and like, oh, I'm gonna move. All right, we need this guy for 26. Well, I'll give you this guy for 2 years here, and then that'll set up this move here, and then this guy's in with this guy, and then it's very, very, very hard to be an athlete that has that kind of team and like builds that kind of team around them to like really be independent and really not be used as a pawn in a game like that, because that's so real, dude.
No, it is. Absolutely it is. And I'm not the one, I don't care about job titles. That means nothing to me. I'm going to watch after people, and that's my job. And just, we got to, because you look at it, especially, when you get grandmother's apple pie right. And I always say it's like surfing. When that right wave comes along, you better get on that board and ride it for everything it's worth, because that wave may never come back again for a while.
I said this to Davey Coombs yesterday about Jet and Hayden and like just where the sport is right now. I'm like, bro, we got a wave. Like, we need to catch this fucking wave.
You better
ride it.
Ride it for everything it's worth.
Because it hasn't come around since Jeremy McGrath.
Well, there you go. And that's what I believe that. But, I'm just thinking about going above and beyond that and just looking, like I say, when I watch the guys in Supercross and motocross, I mean, basically these guys are in a constant state of injury of some kind, whether it be either at the races or through testing, or it could be some training thing, or could fall down their bicycle, or whatever it is. And I think managing that, or having a better grasp to it, to get the guys back into the more normal state faster is, I think that's an area that could be an advantage to a team.
So what's like with the Superhuman Protocol, like what is there a product? Like what's the product? How does it, because it sort of seems like you could kind of piecemeal those things together. Like,
well, this technology's been around for a few years, but it's always been kind of sort of in separate elements.
Yeah.
But no one's ever packaged it like what Jason has, and it's the package and the way it's put together that I believe is going to make the difference. And I'm hoping that an opportunity can open and we can go in there and again, rather than talk about it, I'm a firm believer in, let the results do the talking, and you don't have to say much. So it's just a matter of getting, maybe a few doors opening up here and getting that shot. There's definitely some people I'd like to help, and definitely Troy Lee is somebody that, I was the first guy in road racing to ever have a custom painted helmet, and Troy did my first helmet in 1989. So I've been with Troy now for 35 years, and it's funny because, if I talk to one of the riders in Troy's team, I've been with Troy for 35 years. An example, like Justin Barcia is only 32 years old, and those other guys are younger. So that relationship with him has been awesome, and just like we just designed a new replica that's going to be coming out here probably 6-8 months with a rye, and he was explaining this to me. It's like with me, he doesn't need to, like I can call him on the phone and he's drawing all by hand. And that's all it took. And it was magic. And my designs were always cutting edge, state of the art, and always had the best helmet sales. And, I have to thank Troy Lee for that.
Yeah, he's just a pretty incredible human.
No, he is. And I like him, and just some of the funny stories. And I know I saw the podcast. You remember the Wild Turkey Circle thing? And where that came. But his address really was Wild Turkey Circle, because I had been there a few times, and I'd sent stuff back, back and forth. But he's just stories about one of his painters. His name was Higgy, and this guy shows up to work. And only has one shoe on, and Troy's like, "Where's your shoe?" The guy doesn't even know. But yet that's how artists can be.
He was just incredible artist.
But he was like
yeah.
the most incredible, talented artist like there. And the guy shows up to work with one shoe on.
He's like, it doesn't matter.
And he didn't even think about it. But that's just how they are. And I'd laugh. I mean, those are the classic stories that have all the punch, And I still talk to, every time I say, man, you remember Higgy? He's like, yeah, the one shoe guy.
Yeah.
That's something we'll never forget. But Troy has just been a big supporter of mine and been a big help and really helped me sort of dominate the helmet sales. And no matter what brand I went with, the design was always state of the art. And, I may be biased here, but, I don't know. It was just a connection that Troy and I had. I just always thought that I had a way to get better designs out of them than anybody else. But I think it's just a matter of the relationship you have with people. And, but he runs as a motocross, supercross effort, but just knowing the people and it'd be cool to help somebody out that you already have a relationship with.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you retired and you walked away, like when you went into business, was it the case where you made more money post racing than in racing?
Yeah. Yes. But the way I've always approached it, I've never had a job in my life.
Yeah, that's kind of the vibe I get is like you just kind of, you were racing and you made some money there and then you went and you'd like turned it into more money there and now you just kind of get to cruise and do whatever.
Well, it's, I was never driven by the monetary aspect of it. I always wanted to do what I wanted to do, because that's where your creativity, what really, brings that out. It's like, what do you really want to do? I mean, I know a lot of people that have jobs that don't like going to work every day. Imagine how that would be. So that's why I say I've never had a job, just because everything I've done, it's always stuff that I really wanted to do. And that's a huge benefit. I'm very lucky in that aspect. But yeah, it's just the way it's been, at least so far.
And so did you have any idea of like the kind of business stuff that you were going to get into, or it kind of was just like opportunity after opportunity?
No, I mean, I don't come from a background of really real estate development. No one in my family ever did it. And I just educate myself with my eyes. But, it's like the time I told you that I saw Bud and just knew. And so when I was out of racing probably 3 years. I'm trying to figure all this out. And I could tell you, I sympathize with these guys that retire and they're some guys take many different paths after that because they're truly, like I say, they're struggling. Like you say, it's a pain because the thing that you've known your whole life and the thing that you've got up every day and the levels that you pushed yourself to and the risk you've taken and everything you've been through is just gone. So now what's going to fill that? I mean, I wouldn't call it a void. It's like I remember when I went to the Grand Canyon, you see how huge that hole is. That's about what it's like. And some guys, it collapses some people. They can't find that and they turn to things that aren't in their best interest. But it took me about 3 years and being in Southern California, Beverly Hills, and just noticing, different architecture and things that I really responded to. And it's just something that I thought, wow, how come the houses here don't look like the houses everywhere else? You have to go to, New York City or, the high-end places in Miami, Chicago, the big cities, San Francisco, where the big money's at, just because the materials they use. I mean, it's some of the stuff we have, all the materials come from Europe. It's, there's nothing on that house that you can buy from a store or shop or order. It's all handmade to drawings. And I mean, that sort of level of things. And that's why it has that aristocratic air about it. You can walk onto that property and it just feels like expensive. But why does it feel that way? Because there's an air to it, and that's the air that you can create, and that comes from this sort of creativity, that ability that I think that I have to establish that vibe. and that I just liked it, and so that's what I had done it for a number of years. But like you say, it's that competitive racing spirit never leaves your DNA. And I tell you, I feel bad that I was away for so long, but truly disconnected from it, because there's a lot of great people out there, and to be able to come back and reconnect with these people, and like you say, I'm fully committed to coming back into this operation at some level with somebody, and really, looking after people. I mean, the thing is, you want to look after people, but also help people accomplish things that have always been dreams of theirs, but not yet reality. And that is priceless. And I tell you, you can just see people and the happiness that when you look at a kid or help them do something, and you can just see it's made his world. I mean, you can't put a price tag on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And to, I guess, do that from a place of knowing how it felt in your own life, and like knowing how meaningful it was for yourself.
Yeah. And I like you said, I just, I know I have a lot of experience and going outside the sport into something totally different and learning sort of a business side of things of it. So, when you come back, you actually come back, I feel more prepared and, ready to, and I'm really mean it when I say truly help an operation, like step it up.
Yeah. I just gotta press this camera real quick. Well, before I let you get out of here, mate, what's some advice that you'd give, given the unique life that you've lived, some advice for young people?
I would say you want to surround yourself with people that do what you do that are a lot better than you.
Mm.
I think that's an important thing, but it's also, and this is going to be the real struggle for everybody, is it's finding the right people to be around that truly have your best interest. Because I've done it, and trust me, I've stepped in that mud hole, and I see guys stepping in that same mud hole today that that venture off into some project, and it doesn't work out well, and has a negative impact on their career, and then they're trying to rebound, just from the PR side of it, the mental side of it, and so it just it puts you to a level where it's really twice as hard to get back to where you were. And so it's just being around the right people and being around people that truly have your best interest. I think for these young kids, that's very critical.
And how do you develop that skill of knowing who those people are?
Well, it's like when you ask somebody, how many friends do you have? If you can count them on one hand when you die, you probably had a pretty good life. And so that's the way it is. It's tough, but yeah, I don't know if there's an answer for that. You just hope that you just see more the other way than you do what I would say the right way, because everybody's more worried about their own selves and their agenda, and I understand they have to be to a point, but as you mentioned, some of this stuff is like a chess game with people's careers and lives, and I've seen even from brand to brand, especially some of these brands that own other brands, just like we talk about in MotoGP, I mean, I'm sure the Red Bull factory team doesn't want Pedro Acosta winning all. I mean, even though they want to see Pedro win, because essentially he's KTM, but with a gas brand, but still, at least for this year, they would rather see Bender or Jack Miller winning and then Acosta getting second. That'd be their dream. But sometimes those situations can create, and I've seen it in Supercross, motocross, I've seen it in all different disciplines, where if you're on the wrong side of that, you really have somebody controlling your destiny. But yet you're out there risking your life and taking all these chances and risks, but yet you're sort of being held back. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, mate, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm very glad that we got to make it happen on the time that we did while you were in town. Where do you go? You go back to Florida next?
Yeah, actually, tomorrow I'm headed back to West Palm Beach, but man, this has been an awesome opportunity. I tell you, to get a chance to be here, it feels like a true honor. To see the legends you've had sitting in this chair and doing these podcasts. Like I say, I follow your series of podcasts, and I mean, it's an honor. To see Troy Lee here. I mean, and all the riders and the different, and just like on Monday, you're saying that Levi Kitchen was here, Davey Coombs. I mean, these are, definitely Davey's, a true legend of the motocross world and the sport in general. And, Levi coming in as a young kid, but he's already shown what he's capable of. And, he rides for Mitch Payton, who I know well. And, I have a ton of respect for Mitch. I mean, that guy, I don't know too many people that outwork him. So, man, it's an honor. I just feel like I can't believe I'm sitting here. It's truly something special, and I just want to thank you for your time and really enjoyed it.
No, likewise, mate. And I hope now that you're kind of like stepping back into the industry, I hope you find a cool place to land and put the years of knowledge and expertise to good use.
Yeah, no, I look forward to perhaps seeing you at some of these rounds and races, and especially the listeners and things like that. If anybody's out there, if you're there, you see me, come up, say hello. I'd like to, I love people, I love talking to people, and it's super cool. I'm stoked.
No, well, I appreciate it, mate.
Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. And to listen to the full 3-hour podcast, search Gypsy Tales in your favorite podcast platform or click the link in the description below. Gypsy Gang.